I was planning to murder him. I got him into the stall by saying, "Look, I have something to show you." So I got him into the stall, and I told him to turn around because I wanted it to be a surprise. I was talking to him, and I told him, "All right, now I have to put my hand over your mouth."
Okay.
And so I did, and I lifted his neck up. I took the knife out, and I proceeded to slit his throat.
This is the interrogation of a 14-year-old murderer, Michael Hernandez, who died suddenly in 2021 in a Florida state prison where he had served nearly 20 years of a life sentence. On the 3rd of February 2004, at age 14, Hernandez meticulously planned and carried out the murder of his classmate, Jaime Goff, by stabbing him 40 times. The subsequent police investigation revealed a horrifying truth. This attack was intended as the first stage of a serial killer plot. Investigators discovered a long, handwritten list of victims. Hernandez was extremely obsessed with notorious serial killers, particularly Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, with the intention of emulating their actions. To better understand the horrific details of this case and the sudden death of Michael Hernandez, watch this analysis video and leave your comments below. But first, we need to know who Michael Hernandez is. When the crime occurred, Michael Hernandez was just a 14-year-old 8th grade student attending Southwood High School in Miami-Dade County, Florida. To the outside community, educators, and friends, Hernandez presented an impeccable image. He was recognized as an outstanding student in the school's gifted program. His appearance was unremarkable, characterized by a quiet demeanor and an intellectual air. Raised in a stable, traditional family, he showed no signs of aggression, disobedience, or family instability prior to the incident. However, subsequent clinical assessments and forensic evidence revealed a stark contrast between his outward appearance and his inner psychological state. Beneath the typical innocence of a teenager lay a deep, morbid obsession with notorious American serial killers, particularly Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. Hernandez had extensively studied their methods, motivations, and psychological profiles. This obsession eventually manifested as a grand delusion. He began to see himself as a supreme power or a god, internalizing a supposed mission to purify the world through planned elimination. Driven by this extreme ideological framework, Hernandez shifted from passive thinking to overt violence. His inner psychological deviance quickly escalated into an intent to act, and relying on his outwardly studious and gentle demeanor, he easily carried out his heinous plan, ultimately leading to the calculated murder of his 14-year-old classmate and best friend, Jaime Goff. The victim, Jaime Goff, was also a 14-year-old student at Southwood High School, attending the same school as Michael Hernandez. The two boys were classmates in the school's highly selective gifted program, a program specifically designed for students who demonstrated exceptional cognitive and analytical abilities. This shared learning environment fostered a close personal relationship, leading friends and family members to consider them close companions, frequently interacting both inside and outside the classroom. The case file establishes a clear profile of the victim. Goff was described by teachers and classmates as intelligent and well-behaved. He demonstrated a high level of dedication to his studies and had a particular talent for music, spending considerable time playing the violin. School records and witness testimony indicate that Goff was highly regarded by teachers for his cooperative attitude and willingness to help his peers with their studies. Within his family, he was considered the pride of the Goff family. A crucial element in the relationship between the two students was Goff's absolute trust in Hernandez. Goff regarded Hernandez as a close friend, frequently sharing his daily academic experiences, personal thoughts, and routines without hesitation. Forensic analysis of this relationship revealed that Goff's inherent compliance, lack of suspicion, and predictable daily routines inadvertently made him an ideal target for a violent individual. Goff was completely unaware that his everyday interactions were being analyzed by Hernandez to assess his vulnerability. This trust directly influenced the events of Tuesday, the 3rd of February 2004. On that day, the inherent safety of their friendship and school environment led Goff to follow Hernandez to a secluded area. This basic compliance directly led the victim into a deadly trap planned by Hernandez. The horrific, meticulously planned attack took place on Tuesday morning, the 3rd of February 2004, inside Southwood High School. At age 14, Michael Hernandez moved from violent fantasies to carrying out a carefully planned criminal act, marking a significant escalation in his behavior. The entire sequence of events demonstrates a high degree of preparation, behavioral control, and forensic awareness, a stark contrast to typical impulsive attacks by minors. On the morning of the attack, Hernandez arrived at school with a series of specific items concealed inside his ordinary school backpack. Investigative records concluded that the items had been prepared in advance to facilitate the planned offense and reduce forensic traces. The kit included an army-style knife, a pair of disposable rubber gloves designed to prevent the formation of potential abrasions, a wool hat to prevent the transfer of hair evidence at the crime scene, and a windbreaker to prevent the victim's blood from staining his body. Forensic analysis of this preparation revealed that Hernandez had thoroughly researched staged murders. Investigators concluded that the clothing had been selected to reduce visible forensic contamination during the incident. This calculated preparation took place in his home environment before boarding the school bus, demonstrating that the attack was not a spontaneous reaction to a personal conflict but a long-planned tactic. During the morning break, Hernandez proactively contacted his close friend, Jaime Goff. Taking advantage of the basic level of personal trust established over months of shared study, Hernandez asked Goff to accompany him to a specific location on the 2nd floor of the school, saying he needed to discuss a top-secret matter. Goff, showing no defensiveness or suspicion due to their established social relationship, complied. Hernandez led Goff into the men's restroom on the 2nd floor, a location chosen because it was less crowded at that particular time. The restroom's architectural layout ensured the necessary isolation from faculty supervision and peer observation. Once inside, Hernandez led Goff to the back of the area into a restroom for disabled individuals. This restroom had enough space to accommodate both of them simultaneously, while limiting the victim's potential escape or retreat routes. Once inside the restroom, investigators determined that Hernandez isolated the victim before initiating the planned assault. Without warning, Hernandez suddenly attacked the victim. According to investigators, the initial assault targeted a critical area of the victim's body, causing severe injuries to cause rapid blood loss and minimize the victim's ability to call for help. The assault continued for several moments, resulting in extensive injuries. The forensic examination documented numerous serious injuries, confirming the extreme severity of the attack. The distribution and frequency of the wounds indicated a strong, sustained physical effort. Investigators determined that the victim attempted to defend himself during the assault before becoming incapacitated. The attack continued until the victim was no longer able to resist. In subsequent formal interrogations conducted by law enforcement officials and prosecutors, Hernandez provided a detailed, chronological account of this particular period. Investigators noted that his testimony was characterized by a cold, emotionless expression. Investigators noted that Hernandez described the incident in a detached and emotionless manner during questioning. Hernandez described in detail how he monitored the victim's weakening physical reactions to determine when his objective had been achieved. He explained to the prosecution that he was fully conscious throughout the attack, tracking the time and assessing the extent of the damage he inflicted with analytical precision, viewing the event as empirical evidence of his self-aware capacity to take human life. After Goff lay completely unconscious on the bathroom floor, Hernandez moved on to the containment and cleanup phase of his plan. After the incident, investigators determined that Hernandez attempted to conceal evidence before leaving the scene into a secret compartment in his backpack. He then attempted to remove visible forensic traces before leaving the restroom. While Hernandez was at the sink, another student entered the restroom and discovered Goff's body in the open stall. Demonstrating a high degree of cognitive flexibility and emotional control, Hernandez didn't attempt to flee or panic. Instead, he immediately feigned shock and confusion, displaying a deceptive demeanor. He looked at the witness and calmly said, "We should go tell someone," thus positioning himself as the discoverer of the crime, not the perpetrator. After this statement, Hernandez calmly walked out of the restroom, down the school hallway with the other students. He went straight to his scheduled next class. He sat in his assigned seat, retrieved his study materials, and participated in the usual classroom activities. Testimony from teachers and classmates present at the class confirmed that Hernandez appeared completely normal, spoke normally, and showed no obvious signs of psychological stress, physical agitation, or autonomic nervous system arousal. He acted on the assumption that his meticulous cleanup and deceptive behavior had successfully severed his connection to the murder, creating what he believed to be a perfect alibi. However, this period of safety was short-lived. As faculty and law enforcement sealed off the crime scene on the second floor, the remaining physical and biological evidence began providing investigators with the objective data needed to trace the direct source of the attack. What clue do you think led to Hernandez's exposure? Following the discovery of Jaime Gov's body, the Miami-Dade Police Department immediately activated emergency procedures, completely sealing off Southwood High School. Patrol units and forensic teams sealed off all exits, preventing any individuals from leaving the campus, while a systematic search of the surrounding area was conducted. Because the crime occurred inside the school grounds during school hours, investigators initially focused their screening on students observed near the second-floor restrooms around the estimated time of the attack. During the examination of students' personal belongings, detectives inspected Michael Hernandez's backpack. Inside a hidden compartment of the backpack, investigators recovered several items of forensic significance that became key evidence in the case, along with a synthetic windbreaker matching the items prepared that morning. Furthermore, a detailed forensic examination of Hernandez's footwear, further forensic testing linked additional physical evidence recovered from Hernandez's belongings to the victim through DNA analysis. The forensic evidence recovered during the search established a direct connection between Hernandez and the crime, leading to his immediate arrest and transfer to a secure detention facility for questioning. As the criminal investigation deepened, detectives uncovered evidence suggesting the February 3 attack was not a single, spontaneous event, but part of a broader plan involving additional intended victims. Interrogations and witness interviews revealed a failed plot that occurred precisely the day before, on Monday, the 2nd of February 2004. That afternoon, Hernandez used a similar tactic, successfully luring another 14-year-old male, identified in the investigation records by the initials AM, into the same second-floor restroom. According to investigators, Hernandez allegedly intended to carry out a violent attack during that encounter. However, the target, AM, stated that he suddenly felt anxious and uneasy. Despite Hernandez's verbal warnings to close the restroom door, AM refused to enter the enclosed space and left the restroom, inadvertently thereby avoiding what investigators believe could have become another serious incident. Subsequently, a comprehensive search warrant was executed at Hernandez's home, focusing on his bedroom, notebooks, and digital hard drives. Computer forensics units and crime scene investigators uncovered a highly structured and detailed collection of digital and handwritten documents detailing his ideological motives. The most significant finding was a handwritten document labeled Target List. This document listed the names of specific classmates, acquaintances, and family members identified as potential future targets. Notably, the list included the name of Hernandez's own sister, confirming that his violent intentions were not limited by family ties. The emotional turmoil within the family was exposed when Hernandez showed signs of mental breakdown, sobbing uncontrollably, while speaking directly to and apologizing to his sister's name, also appeared on the list of intended targets. This rare display of distress contrasted sharply with the emotional detachment he maintained throughout his initial description of the attack. Subsequent analysis of Hernandez's official statements revealed his psychological motives. He made it clear to behavioral analysts and detectives that the killing of Jaime Goff was not motivated by personal conflict, revenge, jealousy, or bullying. Instead, the act stemmed entirely from a deeply disturbed psychological fixation that investigators later examined in detail. Hernandez explained that this first murder was designed to serve as what investigators described as the beginning of a broader violent plan. He nurtured a rigid, grandiose illusion that he had a higher mission in society, to believing he had a distorted mission to fundamentally change the world, according to his delusional beliefs, viewing himself as an objective instrument of purification. But later, at his second trial in 2016, he made a completely different statement. But given such insane and ruthless motives, the complex interplay of the combination of disturbing beliefs and the prosecution's claims regarding his lack of remorse, how will the scales of justice judge a minor murderer? Watch the rest of the video to find out. The case involving Michael Hernandez went through 2 lengthy phases of trial, highlighting the protracted battle within the American justice system over juvenile responsibility and mental capacity. The first phase of the trial began in 2008. During these proceedings, the defense focused heavily on a mental health-based defense strategy, attempting to prove that Hernandez suffered from severe paranoid schizophrenia. The defense argued that this clinical condition detached him from reality, rendering him legally incapacitated at the time of the crime and thus exempting him from normal criminal prosecution. As part of this strategy, Hernandez's mother testified, clearly stating in court that her son was experiencing severe mental instability and required intensive psychological support and medical intervention, rather than punitive detention. However, state prosecutors presented counter-assessments from independent, court-appointed forensic psychologists. These experts refuted the defense's claims, testifying that while Hernandez exhibited severe personality disorders, he was fully aware of the nature and consequences of his actions in the attack. Consequently, the jury rejected the mental health defense, convicting Hernandez of first-degree murder. Given the severity of the crime, the court handed down the maximum sentence for a juvenile offender at the time, life imprisonment without parole. After his conviction, Hernandez was transferred to Columbia Correctional Facility, a high-security state prison located in Lake City, Florida, to begin serving his sentence. He remained at the facility until 2016, when a significant constitutional change altered the legal landscape of the case. The U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling affirming that mandatory life imprisonment is not eligible for parole for juvenile offenders who violate the Eighth Amendment's prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment. This legal precedent required individual sentence review hearings to assess the juvenile's potential for rehabilitation, leading to the reopening of Hernandez's case in 2016. During the 2016 sentence review hearing, Hernandez broke down in tears as he delivered his formal apology to the court, attempting to demonstrate his personal rehabilitation. However, the prosecution countered this argument by presenting crucial evidence obtained from recordings of prison phone conversations. These recordings showed that Hernandez's public remorse was entirely fabricated. In a recorded call between Hernandez and his girlfriend, his real voice was captured, in which he discussing how he intended to present himself during the upcoming hearing for his upcoming trial. Furthermore, the prosecution demonstrated that Hernandez maintained his original violent tendencies during his incarceration. Prison surveillance and electronic diaries proved he consistently listened to media content that prosecutors argued reflected an ongoing fascination with violent themes, while also continuing to express interest in notorious criminal figures from history. Based on this evidence, the presiding judge concluded that Hernandez was unlikely to demonstrate sufficient rehabilitation based on the evidence presented. The court then rejected his plea for clemency and upheld the life sentence without parole. This final ruling ensured his continued imprisonment, although his final journey ended unexpectedly in this very prison 5 years later. The Michael Hernandez case ended abruptly on the 29th of April, 2021, when prison surveillance cameras captured Hernandez suddenly collapsing to the floor of his cell. Medical personnel arrived at the scene, but he was pronounced dead at age 31. The official autopsy report attributed his sudden death to a serious illness, ending his life sentence. While the perpetrator's death closed the legal and criminal chapter, the psychological impact on the victim's family remains. The void left by the death of 14-year-old Jaime Goff has lasted for more than 2 decades. In response to this tragedy, the Goff family chose to support the community by establishing an official memorial scholarship fund named after their son. This initiative transforms their personal loss into a learning resource for other young people. Our deepest condolences go out to the Goff family for this enduring loss. The incident at Southwood High School serves as a reminder of the need for families and educational institutions to maintain proactive communication, objective early mental health support, and behavioral intervention to identify concerning changes before they escalate into serious incidents. Dominic Anthony Occoquan Jr. is an American death row inmate who brutally murdered his ex-girlfriend's parents. He is scheduled to be executed on the 28th of July, 2026, ending 40 years of legal appeals. In this video, we'll examine the gruesome details of what happened in 1986, the serious nature of the crime, and the final controversies surrounding the case. Will Occoquan be executed as scheduled, or will the appeal process be prolonged once again? Watch until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments below. First, we need to understand exactly who Dominic Anthony Occoquan Jr. is. Dominic Anthony Occoquan Jr. was born on the 29th of August 1945 and lived in Florida, USA. Subsequent investigative and psychological records indicate that he was a reclusive individual, exhibiting severe possessiveness in romantic relationships and showing clear signs of emotional instability. In the period immediately preceding the crime, Occoquan experienced extreme psychological stress following the breakdown of his romantic relationship. He began frequenting local bars and developed deep resentment and hostility towards those he believed were responsible for the relationship's failure. Occoquan's initial target of deliberate violence was Anita Garrity, his former girlfriend. After their breakup, Garrity sought safety and stability by moving back to live with her parents in Pasco County, Florida, with her young child. Because of this arrangement, the Artsner family became directly involved in the situation, acting as a shield protecting their daughter from Occoquan's persistent harassment. This particular family connection formed the basis of the perpetrator's resentment, as he saw it as the main obstacle preventing him from approaching his former lover. So, who exactly was the victim of this double homicide or fatal incident? Ultimately, two completely innocent people lost their lives because of Occoquan's impulsive rage. The victims were Raymond Artsner and his wife, Martha Artsner, the biological parents of Anita Garrity, Occoquan's former girlfriend. During that time, growing increasingly fearful of Occoquan, Anita and her daughter moved back to live with her parents at their family home in Pasco County, Florida. The Artsners were a strong support system and a shield, protecting their daughter from the constant harassment of her deranged ex-boyfriend. Despite their efforts to distance themselves from Occoquan, the victim's family could not escape his harassment, which escalated into a horrific crime. What are the chilling details of this crime, and what miraculous stroke of luck occurred during the attack? This specific question leads directly to the sequence of events of that fateful night, precisely analyzing the perpetrator's actions as he approached the isolated house, the cutting of communication infrastructure using machinery, the break-in into the family space, and the subsequent double murder. Furthermore, the analysis also addresses the unexpected survival of the remaining family members present in the house when the crime occurred, representing the only positive outcome amidst an extremely brutal event. First, we must consider the precise chronological order. Occoquan's unannounced escalation of violence will now be analyzed. Let's continue. The entire incident unfolded over several hours in the early morning of the 10th of June, 1986, in a residential area of Pasco County, Florida. It began between approximately 12 a.m. and 1 a.m. when Dominic Anthony Occoquan Jr. drove to the Artsners' home in Pasco County. Investigative records indicate Occoquan arrived at the property in a highly agitated state after drinking at several local bars. Upon arrival, he approached the front door and began banging loudly, demanding entry. He stated his intention was to speak directly with Anita Garrity to mend their broken relationship. Inside the house, the family immediately took self-defense. Behind a locked door, Anita Garrity firmly refused to let him in or speak to him. Recognizing the potential danger of the situation, her father, Raymond Artsner, intervened to protect his family. He warned Occoquan through the door, clearly ordering him to leave the house immediately. Raymond Artsner added that if Occoquan refused to leave the property, the family would contact the local police department for assistance. This confrontation left Akakone extremely angry and embarrassed. Instead of calming down, he returned to his car and drove away from the scene in a fit of rage. After leaving, Akakone used the next hour to plan a violent return. Between 1:30 a.m. and 2 a.m., he drove back to his location to retrieve a handgun. Armed, he returned to the Artsner house about an hour after the initial confrontation. To carry out a surprise attack on the people inside, he turned off his car's headlights, parked a considerable distance from the house, and quietly approached the property on foot. Before attempting to reach the main entrance of the house, Akakone had devised a deliberate plan to isolate the family from the outside world. He crept to the back of the house, where the main utility lines were located. Using a specialized cutting tool, he severed the external telephone lines leading into the house. Subsequent investigation confirmed that this specific action was designed to eliminate the family's ability to call the police or request emergency assistance. By destroying the communication lines, Akakone turned the suburban home into an isolated environment in the middle of the night, ensuring that no outside help could be called for in the next phase of his plan. Moments later, the attack began. In the dark house, Raymond Artsner was awakened by strange noises coming from the side yard. Still in his pajamas, he decided to investigate the source of the commotion. He grabbed a flashlight and opened the door to step out into the yard to check the surroundings. As soon as Raymond Artsner stepped outside, he came face to face with Akakone at close range. Without any warning or dialogue, Akakone immediately raised his pistol and shot Raymond Artsner. The gunshot critically injured Raymond Artsner, who collapsed immediately. Raymond Artsner was later pronounced dead at the scene before he could call for help or alert other family members in the house. The first gunshot shattered the silence of the night, instantly waking the rest of the household. In her bedroom, Martha Artsner, Anita Garrity, and her young child were startled awake by the noise. Hearing the screams and commotion outside, Martha Artsner rushed to the front door to assess the situation and find her husband. At the same time, Akakone approached to break into the house. He used the butt of his gun and his foot to smash the glass of the front door. After shattering the glass, he reached through the gap, unlocked the latch from the inside, and stormed into the house. He encountered Martha Artsner in the main hallway leading to the living room as she was trying to navigate the dark corridor. At this point, the perpetrator launched a second, deadly attack. Akakone confronted Martha Artsner and shot her multiple times. Martha Artsner suffered fatal injuries and was later pronounced dead at the scene. While Akakone focused on pursuing and shooting Martha Artsner in the living room, Anita Garrity seized the brief moment to save herself and her young child. Sitting in the nearby bedroom, she heard the continuous gunfire and her mother's final screams, clearly indicating that her parents had been murdered and there was no longer any way to save them or protect the house. Realizing that she and her daughter were the next targets, Garrity acted in the short time her mother confronted the gunman. She clutched her young daughter tightly to prevent her from making any sound. Using all her strength, she quietly opened the back exit, stepped into the dark backyard, and began running across the empty lawn toward the neighbor's house. This swift escape was successful. She made her way through the dark yard and reached safety in a neighbor's house, where she could immediately report the double murder. This crucial action saved Anita Garrity and her child from the attack, preventing Akakone from finding and preventing any surviving witnesses from identifying him to the case before police could arrive at the scene. Immediately after the surviving witness successfully escaped, she called the police to report the attack. The Pasco County Sheriff's Office received an emergency call from Anita Garrity shortly after she successfully escaped the house and reached safety on a nearby property. The dispatcher sent patrol units to the scene, where officers established a security perimeter around the Artsner house. Upon entering, responding officers found the bodies of the two victims, Raymond Artsner and Martha Artsner, and officially confirmed that both had been fatally shot. Forensic investigators immediately began processing the physical environment, documenting the unauthorized entry through the front door and collecting several spent handgun shell casings scattered across the yard and living room floor. Later, during the investigation, relying primarily on the direct testimony of witness Anita Garrity, investigators quickly identified the perpetrator. Because Garrity had a prior relationship with the attacker and witnessed the initial confrontation at midnight, she provided detectives with the accurate identifying information of Dominic Anthony Occoconee Jr. This crucial intelligence allowed the police department to bypass the usual suspect identification phase. A statewide emergency alert, "Balo be on the lookout," and an emergency arrest warrant for 2 counts of first-degree murder were formally issued within hours of the shooting, providing law enforcement with a physical description, vehicle information, and known background data of the suspect. The intensive manhunt yielded immediate results thanks to the coordinated deployment of law enforcement resources in the surrounding area. Police officers quickly located and successfully apprehended Dominic Anthony Occoconee Jr. while he was attempting to hide at a location not far from the main crime scene. The arrest was carried out without further casualties, and the suspect was apprehended without incident. During the process of documenting and searching the suspect and the surrounding area, police recovered the specific handgun used in the double murder, along with other physical evidence directly linking the suspect to the scene. The recovery of the murder weapon provided forensic teams with the necessary material to conduct ballistic comparisons with shell casings found at the home. With the suspect safely apprehended and key evidence collected, Occoconee was formally charged under the law with his actions. The swift arrest concluded the initial tactical phase of the case, shifting the matter from an active police investigation to the judicial system. However, while the immediate threat to the community has been addressed, the protracted legal battle to secure justice for the deceased victims has only just begun, initiating a complex process involving prosecution, trial preparation, and decades of subsequent administrative challenges. The trial phase of the case began after the initial police investigation concluded, initiating a lengthy process within the Florida court system. Legal proceedings spanned decades, including specific jury deliberations, sentencing decisions, and extensive appeals reviews. In September 1987, the formal trial of Dominic Anthony Occoconee Jr. began in Pasco County. After reviewing physical evidence, forensic ballistics, and survivor witness testimony, the jury found Occoconee guilty of first-degree murder on 2 separate counts. However, during the sentencing phase, the jury's decision on appropriate punishment was divided. When voting on whether to recommend the death penalty, the jury reached a close consensus, resulting in a narrow 7-5 vote in favor of the death penalty. Then, in November 1987, the presiding judge delivered the final verdict. Under Florida law at the time, the judge had the final say on the sentence, regardless of the jury's exact split. For the murder of Raymond Artzner, the judge sentenced Occoconee to life imprisonment. For the murder of Martha Artzner, the judge accepted the jury's recommendation and imposed a death sentence. Following the 1987 final verdict, Occoconee and his lawyers initiated an appeals process that lasted nearly 40 years. Throughout his decades of incarceration, the defense filed numerous appeals for clemency after being convicted at various levels of the state and federal justice systems. Notably, these efforts included extensive appeals filed in 1993 and 2006. The defense's primary legal strategy focused on arguing that Occoconee suffered from severe mental illness and profound emotional distress at the time of the crime. The defense argued that these psychological factors should be considered mitigating circumstances to overturn the death sentence and reduce it to life imprisonment. However, after extensive review of the case file, the Florida Supreme Court and federal appellate courts repeatedly rejected these arguments, upholding the original sentence. Ultimately, all legal avenues for overturning the sentence were exhausted, bringing the lengthy history of petitions, hearings, and appeals to a final conclusion. This conclusion effectively ends decades of legal proceedings, concludes the administrative process, and brings a definitive legal end to the case for the surviving members of the victim's family. The case of Dominic Anthony Occoconee Jr. has entered its final administrative phase, attracting considerable attention from legal analysts and human rights organizations due to the unusual circumstances surrounding the planned execution. After all post-conviction appeals procedures were completed, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis officially signed the execution warrant for Dominic Anthony Occoconee Jr. According to the administrative order, the execution is scheduled to take place by lethal injection at 6 p.m. on the 28th of July 2026 at the Florida State Prison near Stark, Florida. This executive order sets a specific date for the state to carry out the sentence handed down by the judiciary nearly 4 decades ago, transferring the inmate in accordance with standard pre-execution procedures of the correctional facility. But the upcoming execution has sparked public discussion about the age of the convicted inmate. At age 80, Akikoni is expected to become one of the oldest prisoners executed in the modern history of Florida's death penalty system. Human rights activists and defense attorneys argue that executing an elderly person with declining health due to age poses ethical challenges, raising questions about the necessity and humanity of applying the death penalty to elderly individuals who have served decades in high-security prisons. Beyond age, the case is also the subject of significant legal debate regarding the structure of the original sentence. Advocacy groups, such as Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, have issued formal objections to the execution based on changes to statutory requirements. They emphasize the fact that the 1,987 jury recommended the death penalty by a narrow 7-5 vote. Under current Florida law, a 7/5 unanimous jury recommendation is not sufficient legal grounds for a death sentence, as current law requires an absolute majority. At least 8 out of 12 jurors must agree on the death penalty. While modern legal reforms regarding unanimous jury decisions are not typically applied retroactively to older cases like Akikoni's, these organizations argue that carrying out executions based on majority vote violates constitutional and legal standards and undermines the consistency of the justice system. In your opinion, will the execution take place as scheduled or will it be delayed? And should the old legal provisions in Akikoni's death sentence be mitigated to fit the current legal framework? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll continue the discussion.
Porque soy inocente. Porque voy a coger un arreglo para salvarme la vida cuando soy inocente. Condena perpetua en prisión no es vida. Yo no merezco tener ni un día en prisión por este crimen. Yo no lo hice. Yo no voy a aceptar eso.
The Miramar murders involving the deaths of 3 people remain one of Florida's most controversial criminal cases, spanning over 30 years. In May 2019, Pablo Ibar was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. To this day, after numerous trials, Pablo Ibar has consistently maintained his innocence, leaving the ultimate truth of the case still open. Could there have been a different outcome for this case? Was Pablo Ibar truly innocent? This video provides a detailed analysis of the original crime, the lengthy legal proceedings, and Ibar's current status within the justice system. A grainy, low-resolution surveillance video captured a brutal 1994 triple homicide in Florida, sparking a controversial 30-year legal battle over the true identity of the killer. In the mid-1990s, the city of Miramar, located in South Florida, was the setting for a decades-long criminal investigation. During this period, the area's security situation was complex and challenging, particularly surrounding the nightlife industry and the rise of organized crime. Local authorities regularly monitored upscale entertainment venues and residential areas connected to prominent figures in the nightlife scene, creating a high-risk environment for law enforcement in curbing violent crime in the area. Against this backdrop, the investigation into the triple murder at a Miramar home ultimately focused on 2 main suspects. The first was Pablo Ibar, a 22-year-old man with dual American and Spanish citizenship. At the time of his arrest in 1994, Ibar had no significant prior criminal record, although investigators noted that he maintained a complex social network. The second individual brought under investigation was Seth Penalver, an associate of Ibar. Law enforcement later accused Penalver of being the second perpetrator appearing alongside the main gunman in residential surveillance footage obtained from the crime scene. The early stages of the case established a clear divide between the views of law enforcement and the accused. The police department relied on anthropometric analysis to determine identity, comparing the suspect's physical characteristics to low-resolution images from security footage. Conversely, the suspects consistently maintained their innocence throughout the initial questioning. Both Ibar and Penalver maintained verifiable alibis for the night of the crime, claiming they were not involved with violent criminal networks. This fundamental disagreement set the stage for a protracted legal battle. What specific events unfolded inside the secluded villa in Miramar on that fateful night, and who were the victims of this violent tragedy? The three victims in the June 26, 1994 murder case were inside a house in Miramar. The homeowner was Kazimir Sucharski, 38, a prominent local businessman. Sucharski was widely known in South Florida's nightlife scene as the owner of Casey's Nickelodeon, a popular nightclub that attracted a steady stream of patrons and influential guests. Thanks to his position in the entertainment industry, Sucharski was an influential figure in the local nightlife economy. Present at his house that evening were two young women, Sharon Anderson, 25, and Marie Rogers, 25. Both women worked in the local entertainment industry as dancers and models, and they were visiting Sucharski's suburban mansion on the night of the incident. The events of the case began in the early morning of June 26, 1994, in the quiet interior of Sucharski's home. According to physical evidence and subsequent digital records, two masked, armed men broke into the house. Upon entering the living room, the perpetrators immediately confronted the three occupants. They completely controlled the space, using force to subdue Sucharski, Anderson, and Rogers. Throughout the break-in, the intruders systematically searched the surrounding area, looking for valuables, cash, and personal belongings. During this time, the victims were forcibly restrained while the intruders searched the house for valuables. The incident ended with the deaths of all three victims before the perpetrators fled the scene. The most crucial piece of evidence in the entire investigation was a black and white home security camera placed in the corner of the living room. Unbeknownst to them, the surveillance system had been silently recording the entire incident, capturing approximately 22 minutes of continuous footage, documenting the events inside the home until the perpetrators left. This video provided a vivid and authentic chronicle of the burglary, documenting the victims' movements and the sequence of events. A crucial turning point in the footage occurred when one of the perpetrators temporarily removed his mask to wipe away sweat, revealing his face directly to the camera. However, because the system used standard analog tape technology from the mid-1990s, the recorded images suffered from heavy noise, low resolution, and were obscured by shadows, resulting in blurry and indistinct facial images. The recovery of this 22-minute video footage shifted the focus of local police to forensic analysis. Technicians and investigators repeatedly reviewed specific segments where the first suspect's face was visible, attempting to pause the video footage to identify clear facial features. The low lighting conditions and grainy texture of the black and white recording made accurate identification difficult. But the images remained the foundation of the state's initial investigative hypotheses. Investigators focused their efforts on comparing these specific timelines to existing crime databases and local crime photographs, searching for individuals matching the height, build, and general facial structure observed on the tape. The presence of the camera transformed a case with no live witnesses into a highly technical forensic puzzle, almost entirely focused on deciphering a few seconds of blurry footage. This specific visual evidence was then used by the prosecution to construct a timeline and establish a physical connection to the suspects. Meanwhile, the defense focused heavily on the technical limitations of the footage, arguing that the lack of clarity rendered any definitive identification mathematically and scientifically unreliable. The debate over these specific minutes of footage became a recurring theme throughout decades of subsequent court proceedings, with various video experts offering conflicting interpretations of the suspect's features. Despite the ambiguity of the images, the Miramar Police Department used the video as a primary tool to generate clues within the community. Ultimately, from those blurry images from the surveillance tape, how did investigators narrow down and apprehend the suspects, and what were the motives? Following the events of June 26, 1994, the Miramar Police Department launched a large-scale investigation to identify two individuals appearing in the home surveillance video. A breakthrough in the search occurred approximately a month later, in July 1994, when Pablo Ibarra was arrested by local police in connection with a completely separate and unrelated incident. During his detention, an investigator noticed a physical resemblance between Ibarra and the blurry, low-resolution image of the unmasked suspect in the Sucharski home video. Based primarily on this visual assessment, detectives focused their investigation on Ibar as the primary suspect in the triple murder. To identify the second masked individual in the video, investigators began mapping Ibar's social circle. This network analysis quickly led them to Seth Penalver, an acquaintance of Ibar, who was arrested shortly afterward on the premise that he was a second perpetrator involved in the home invasion. With both suspects apprehended, the prosecution and police detectives put forward several theories about the potential motive for the violent attack. The initial and most direct theory put forward by the prosecution was a typical robbery with murder. Investigators argued that the perpetrator targeted Kazimierz Sucharski's home because of his high status as a wealthy nightclub owner, hoping to find a large amount of cash, jewelry, and luxury items stored in the house. As the investigation deepened, authorities also considered an expanded theory involving deliberate revenge. This second theory suggests that the deaths of the three victims were not random, but rather a premeditated assassination or a settlement of debts related to underlying motives, conflicts, or business competition within the South Florida nightlife entertainment industry managed by Sucharski. The defense teams for both Ibar and Penalver systematically refuted these investigative theories by emphasizing the complete lack of substantiated physical evidence. Lawyers pointed out that following the arrests and subsequent property searches, law enforcement found no stolen goods, cash, jewelry, or personal belongings belonging to Sucharski, Anderson, or Rogers in the possession of any of the suspects. Furthermore, thorough background checks revealed no prior personal or professional relationship, financial transactions, or conflicts of interest between the suspects and any of the three victims. The defense argued that, without any established connection or any money recovered from the alleged robbery, the prosecution's theories about motive were purely speculative. The complete lack of matching physical assets became a key point of contention, contrasting sharply with the prosecution's reliance on photographic identification from security camera footage. The difference between the prosecution's interpretation of the surveillance footage and the defense's emphasis on the lack of physical evidence set the stage for a contentious legal battle. Following these initial accusations, the case entered a complex trial phase where every piece of data was fiercely debated. What was Pablo Ibar's subsequent response to these serious allegations, and what specific evidentiary disputes caused this case to drag on through numerous trials over the next few decades? The early stages of the Miramar triple murder investigation were significantly hampered by structural flaws in the public defense framework and fundamental weaknesses in the prosecution's primary evidence. These initial systemic flaws created a highly unstable foundation for the prosecution's case, which subsequently complicated the proceedings for decades. These weaknesses were immediately apparent during the pretrial preparation and initial presentation of arguments, revealing serious shortcomings in the handling of the case against Pablo Ibar from the outset. The most prominent institutional failure occurred within the public defense system appointed to represent Pablo Ibar during the early stages of the prosecution. His initial lead attorney, Clemmy, suffered serious, undocumented mental health issues and personal crises throughout the pretrial and trial phases. Due to these debilitating personal circumstances, the lawyer failed to perform the basic standard legal procedures necessary to ensure an effective defense for a client facing the most serious criminal charges. The defense lawyer completely disregarded verifying Ibar's alibi, failing to interview or summon key witnesses who could prove the defendant was not present at the crime scene on the night of June 26, 1994. Furthermore, the lawyer did not consult with or hire any independent forensic experts to refute the prosecution's technical interpretations. This complete lack of rigorous counter-verification meant the prosecution's story was largely ignored during the crucial early stages of the case, a deficiency that later led to the revocation of the lawyer's license. These points were also confirmed by Pablo Ibar in an interview. Further exacerbating the weakness of this legal defense is the ambiguous nature of the prosecution's core physical evidence. The entire prosecution relied heavily on home security video footage obtained from Kazimierz Sucharski's home. When independent digital imaging experts eventually analyzed the analog recording, they concluded that the video resolution was too low to meet the scientific criteria necessary for definitive biometric identification. The experts noted that severe image noise, a lack of sharp contrast, and poor lighting conditions made it impossible to accurately identify facial measurements or structural features. According to these technical assessments, using blurry footage to definitively identify any individual is scientifically unreliable, as the blurry features could overlap with a large segment of the general population with similar body proportions. Beyond the technical limitations of the video, the investigation relied on highly contradictory and subjective witness testimony. During the initial identification process, several witnesses were shown identification photographs and asked to identify Ibar. However, a detailed analysis of the official case files revealed significant discrepancies between these emotionally and memorically based claims and the actual conditions recorded at the crime scene. The descriptions provided by witnesses regarding the height, weight, and facial features of the individuals they claimed to recognize did not match the technical data extracted from surveillance footage or physical records compiled by investigators at the scene. These stark discrepancies suggest that the witness identification was heavily influenced by the suggestive nature and prominence of media coverage, rather than being based on direct and objective recollection. This led to numerous trials and multiple changes to the verdict. Details of these trials will be discussed in the following section. The Miramar triple murder case became a complex legal battle spanning decades, characterized by conflicting verdicts, overturned sentences, and intense forensic debates. The formal proceedings began in the late 1990s, shifting the case from an active police investigation to a contentious legal battle in court. The first attempt to prosecute Pablo Ibar took place in the 1998 trial. After much discussion, the trial ended in a retrial because the jury was completely deadlocked, unable to reach a unanimous consensus on the defendant's guilt or innocence based on the evidence presented. The state pursued a second prosecution in 2000. In this trial, the prosecution focused heavily on home security video, arguing that the visual characteristics of the unmasked attacker matched Ibar's physical profile. The prosecution's testimony convinced the jury, leading to a guilty verdict. Consequently, Pablo Ibar received a death sentence and remained on Florida's death row for the next 16 years. This verdict set the groundwork for the state's legal position, even as the defense prepared long-term appeal strategies to challenge the scientific and procedural integrity of the sentence. A major turning point that shifted the course of the case occurred between 2012 and 2016, revealing deep contradictions in the state's structural arguments. In 2012, Ibar's accomplice, Seth Pinover, underwent a separate retrial. The jury in Pinover's case reviewed the identical surveillance footage used to convict Ibar, but concluded that the low-resolution video did not provide sufficient credible evidence to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. As a result, Pinover was acquitted and released. This acquittal created a significant legal paradox, as the same core evidence had led to completely opposite trial outcomes for two accomplices accused of the same crime. Based on this legal precedent, Ibar's appeals team won a historic ruling from the Florida Supreme Court in 2016. The Supreme Court formally overturned Ibar's death sentence and reversed his 2000 conviction. In its formal ruling, the Supreme Court acknowledged that the original trial was fundamentally unfair due to a grave lack of the right to a competent defense. Furthermore, the justices clearly determined that the state's primary evidence, the blurry analog security tape, was meager and weak, lacking the technical reliability necessary to support such a conviction. This ruling overturned the state's previous ruling and ordered a complete retrial. The third major trial took place in 2019, presenting a highly technical forensic conflict, focusing almost entirely on DNA evidence rather than visual identification. To replace the dismissed surveillance footage narrative, the prosecution presented new data. Microscopic DNA traces recovered from a black T-shirt found at the original crime scene, which the state claimed belonged to Pablo Ibar. The prosecution presented this genetic material as strong forensic evidence supporting its theory that Ibar had been inside the house during the incident. The defense immediately launched a comprehensive counterargument targeting the surveillance footage and the procedures for preserving physical evidence. The defense argued that the T-shirt had been stored in substandard, unnumbered containers in a police evidence locker for approximately 25 years. The defense argued that because the garment was kept near other items seized from Ibar during his initial 1994 arrest, the risk of cross-contamination was extremely high. They asserted that the microscopic genetic material was the result of decades of careless storage, not original genetic material remaining at the 1994 crime scene. The 2019 jury ultimately reached a compromise verdict. While the jury found Ibar guilty based on the DNA evidence presented, they chose not to impose a death sentence. Instead, the court sentenced Ibar to life imprisonment without parole, guaranteeing his permanent incarceration within the state prison system. This verdict ended the death penalty case immediately but left core disputes over evidence unresolved. Following the controversial 2019 trial, what is Pablo Ibar's current status, and what specific legal questions remain unanswered as the case enters its fourth decade? Currently, Pablo Ibar is serving a life sentence at the South Bay Correctional Facility in Florida. Now over 50 years old, Ibar has spent more than half his life in prison, enduring 16 years in death row and remaining incarcerated permanently after his 2019 conviction. Despite the passage of time and the inviolable nature of his life sentence, his defense team maintains that the legal battle is far from over. His lawyers continue to file appeals following the conviction, particularly citing Florida Criminal Procedure Rules 3800-3850. To challenge the procedural validity of the 2019 trial, these appeals allege systematic technical errors in the presentation of evidence, and that crucial investigative details concerning the collection and storage of DNA evidence were concealed by authorities. Beyond the regional court system, this case has garnered significant international attention, particularly in Spain due to Ibar's dual citizenship. For decades, his circumstances have served as a prominent symbol for international human rights organizations and advocacy groups, criticizing the structural consistency of the American justice system. His wife, Tanya Ibar, remains central to this public campaign, frequently participating in international media events to maintain awareness and raise necessary funds. The cost of the fourth trial has reached millions of dollars, yet the family continues to seek a fifth trial with the ultimate goal of achieving complete exoneration. From an analytical perspective, the long-running Miramar murder case leaves several fundamental questions unanswered. The central legal question remains whether the available evidence was sufficient to establish Pablo Ibar's responsibility beyond reasonable doubt, or merely an innocent individual caught up in a series of circumstantial evidence and forensic inconsistencies. Furthermore, has this decades-long case finally reached a conclusion with a life sentence in 2019? What are your thoughts on the Miramar murder case and Pablo Ibar's guilt? Please comment below.
I got scared and I started to panic, and I ran outside and threw the diaper away and jumped in the car and started up and left. I felt bad. I felt guilty.
Andrew Richard Lukehart was sentenced to death in February 1997, but nearly 30 years later he was executed by lethal injection on June 2, 2026. This marked the end of a criminal case involving the death of his girlfriend's 5-month-old daughter. In today's video, we'll examine this case, his last meal, and Lukehart's final words. Watch until the end and let me know your thoughts on this case in the comments below. But before we examine the case, we need to know who Andrew Richard Lukehart really was. Andrew Richard Lukehart was born in 1973. At the time of the crime in February 1996, he was 22 years old and 53 when he was executed on June 2, 2026. Regarding his criminal record, Lukehart had a history of domestic instability and violent behavior. Specifically, in the 1996 case, he was on probation. This probation stemmed from a previous conviction in 1994 related to aggravated child abuse. In that case, Lukehart severely injured an 8-month-old girl, the daughter of his former girlfriend. The victim in the 1996 murder was Gabrielle Hanshaw, a 5-month-old girl. The relationship between the perpetrator and the victim was established through Lukehart's cohabitation. Gabrielle was the daughter of Lukhart's current girlfriend. At the time of the crime, Lukehart was living with the child's mother in Jacksonville, Florida. Due to their shared living situation and personal relationship, the mother trusted Lukehart to look after and care for the child alone while she performed other household chores. Analysis of the case revealed a serious failure in risk assessment, as an individual on probation for child abuse was allowed unsupervised access to a vulnerable infant, ultimately leading to a predictable escalation of violence. The investigation showed that this absolute trust directly facilitated the fatal attack. The chronological sequence of events in the Andrew Richard Lukehart murder case is documented through physical evidence, timeline analysis, and subsequent forensic reconstructions. The entire incident unfolded within a clearly defined time frame, beginning in the late afternoon of February 25, 1996, around 5 p.m. At this time, 22-year-old Andrew Richard Lukehart, 1.185 meters tall and weighing over 137 kilograms, returned home to Epson Lane in Jacksonville, Florida. He was accompanied by his partner, Misty Rue, and their 2 young children after a routine family shopping trip. The perpetrator's physique was noteworthy in comparison to the vulnerable state of the infants present in the house. Upon entering the Epson Lane home, the couple divided specific household responsibilities to meet the children's immediate needs. Misty Rue was looking after her older daughter, 2-year-old Ashley, who was ill and needed immediate rest. Rue carried Ashley into one of the bedrooms to comfort and lull her to sleep. Meanwhile, Lukehart took complete responsibility for supervising and caring for the younger child, 5-month-old Gabrielle Hanshaw. His immediate task was changing diapers in an adjacent room. The physical separation of the 2 adults in different areas of the house left the 5-month-old completely under Lukehart's unsupervised care. Investigators concluded that the situation escalated rapidly during this period. As Lukehart attempted to change the diaper, the child became restless, began to squirm on the changing surface, and started crying. Forensic analysis showed that the continuous crying and movement of the 5-month-old triggered an immediate loss of impulse control in the perpetrator. Lukehart became increasingly irritable, impatient, and hostile. Investigators determined that his loss of emotional control resulted in a fatal assault on the infant. In this moment of acute behavioral loss, Lukehart used his large physique to silence the child's cries. Investigators concluded that the infant suffered catastrophic injuries during the incident due to the significant physical disparity between the adult and the child. Medical examiners concluded that the infant died from multiple traumatic injuries sustained during the incident. Gabrielle Hanshaw was pronounced dead shortly after the incident. After the child stopped breathing, Lukehart did not perform any emergency procedures. He did not call 911, nor did he notify Misty Rue in the next room for medical intervention. Instead, his immediate behavioral response was entirely focused on self-preservation and covering up the crime. Investigators determined that he concealed the victim's body in an attempt to avoid detection. Lukehart then transported the sack containing the victim to a secluded pond in the countryside, a short distance from the Epson Lane residential area. According to investigators, he disposed of the victim's body in a nearby body of water in an attempt to conceal evidence. After completing the disposal, Lukehart returned to the main crime scene at his home to establish a comprehensive alibi and fabricate a story. He began contacting his girlfriend and local police while feigning extreme panic and psychological shock. Lukehart presented a detailed fictitious sequence of events to the officers at the scene, claiming that a large, unidentified male intruder had broken into the house. According to his initial testimony, this fictitious attacker suddenly assaulted him, knocked him completely unconscious, and abducted 5-month-old Gabrielle Hanshaw before escaping the area undetected. This elaborately staged kidnapping story immediately triggered a large-scale missing persons investigation across Jacksonville. Law enforcement deployed significant tactical resources, establishing area checkpoints and conducting extensive searches of neighborhoods based on the descriptions provided by Lukehart. Homicide detectives and forensic technicians thoroughly examined the house on Epson Lane, searching for signs of forced entry, foreign DNA, footprints, or evidence of a physical struggle that could corroborate Lukhart's testimony of being attacked by an intruder. Given the sophisticated plot, what clues led to Lukhart's swift arrest? Watch the next part of the video as we analyze the crucial investigative breakthroughs that solved this case. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office initiated an investigation immediately after receiving reports of the large-scale abduction. Law enforcement officials mobilized a massive amount of personnel and technical resources to search for 5-month-old Gabrielle Hanshaw. The search continued relentlessly for 18 consecutive hours, including ground searches, neighborhood sweeps, and area alerts. While field units conducted their efforts to find physical evidence, criminal investigators focused on questioning Andrew Richard Lukehart to gather specific intelligence about the suspected burglar. During formal questioning, homicide detectives identified serious logical inconsistencies in Lukhart's testimony. Upon closer examination, his description of the appearance, method of entry, and escape route of the alleged intruder changed significantly. Furthermore, The established chronological sequence of events contained unexplained gaps, contradicting the underlying geographical and situational parameters. A severe physical anomaly further undermined his credibility. Although Lukehart claimed he had been suddenly knocked unconscious by a large, aggressive assailant during a violent struggle, a comprehensive examination revealed no bruises, scratches, lacerations, or neurological signs consistent with trauma. Faced with the lack of verifiable physical evidence and the presence of direct logical contradictions, the interrogators exerted constant psychological pressure during subsequent interrogation sessions. Investigators employed established interrogation techniques to highlight the impossibilities in his testimony. Under this systematic, tactical interrogation, Lukehart's psychological defenses weakened, and his fabricated defense completely collapsed. He formally retracted his abduction testimony, confessing that the entire home invasion was a staged hoax to evade criminal responsibility, and agreed to cooperate with the search efforts. Lukehart later directed investigators to the location where the victim's body had been concealed, allowing recovery teams to locate the remains, allowing technicians to recover the victim's remains as part of the investigation. Subsequent behavioral and forensic analysis determined the exact motive for the murder. The investigation concluded that the assault was not a premeditated, long-planned act of malice or pre-existing hatred toward the victim. Instead, the crime was classified as an extreme manifestation of impulsive rage and a sudden loss of behavioral control. Faced with a clinging infant during a routine child care task, Lukehart's latent, violent tendencies and poor impulse control led to an immediate and disproportionate physical response. Following official confirmation of the child's death and the arrest of the perpetrator, the victim's mother expressed her profound grief to local media, documenting the immense psychological impact and devastation caused by the sudden loss of her 5-month-old daughter. The arrest of the suspect and the clarification of his motive provided immediate answers about the mechanism of the crime, but they also initiated a lengthy legal process. The transition from the initial arrest to the final resolution of the case raised important procedural questions within the justice system. With the perpetrator in custody and a full confession recorded, the state of Florida prepared to bring the case to trial. The immediate arrest and clear identification of the motive did not lead to a swift execution. Instead, it opened the door to a complex, decades-long process in state and federal courts. The perpetrator had been apprehended, the motive was clear, so why did it take 30 years for this case to conclude? How did the trials unfold? The trial of Andrew Richard Lukehart began in February 1997, marking a crucial stage in the murder proceedings. Lukehart faced formal charges of first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. During the proceedings, the prosecution presented comprehensive forensic findings and physical evidence documenting the circumstances surrounding the child's death. After presenting the evidence and final arguments, the jury began deliberations. The jury needed minimal time to reach a unanimous verdict, declaring Lukehart guilty on all charges. For sentencing, the jury voted 9-3 to recommend the death penalty. This recommendation was strongly supported by specific aggravating circumstances under Florida law. First, the victim was an extremely vulnerable infant. Secondly, Lukehart committed murder while serving a probationary sentence for a previous, very similar charge involving aggravated child abuse of another infant. Lukehart was handcuffed and escorted out of the courtroom by law enforcement officers after the trial concluded. The official verdict initiated an appeals process that lasted nearly 3 decades. Throughout his time in the death row, Lukehart's defense team repeatedly filed petitions and appeals to state and federal courts. The primary goal of these petitions was to reduce the death sentence to life imprisonment without parole. The defense argued that the incident resulted from a sudden psychological breakdown and severe loss of impulse control rather than deliberate intent, and a severe loss of impulse control rather than a calculated intent to take a person's life. This decades-long legal battle culminated in a final emergency appeal in May 2026. On the 1st of May 2026, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed the official death warrant, scheduling the execution for early June. In response, Lucart's lawyers filed last-minute motions to postpone the execution, making two specific arguments: procedural and medical. They asserted that the one-month preparation period between the warrant signing and the execution date was insufficient to ensure fair proceedings. Additionally, the defense raised constitutional concerns regarding the kidney medication Lucart was taking, arguing that the medication could interfere with the execution protocol and raise constitutional concerns regarding the procedure, and thus violating the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishments. The justice system has delivered its final verdict on these last appeals. The Florida Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court have reviewed the arguments and completely rejected all remaining appeals, allowing the execution to proceed as scheduled. With the rejection of these final legal appeals, all statutory relief avenues have ended permanently. This has closed the legal framework of the case and begun the final countdown to the convict facing the court-imposed sentence for the 1,996 crime. At this precise moment, with no further legal intervention, what final statements and acknowledgments will the convicted person make about their conduct? Tune in to the next part of the video as we examine the final hours, the last meal, and the final record of the execution. The execution of Andrew Richard Lucart was officially scheduled for the 2nd of June 2026, with the procedure expected to begin precisely at 6 p.m. Prior to the execution, Florida Department of Corrections regulations allowed convicted prisoners to request a last meal, following standard administrative guidelines, which permit a maximum expenditure of $40 on items purchased from local suppliers. Lucart was served his approved last meal that afternoon before being escorted to the execution chamber. This administrative procedure strictly adhered to security protocols designed for high-profile death penalty cases within state facilities. The state-mandated punishment was carried out at Florida State Prison, located near Stark, Florida. The execution team completed all required administrative and security preparations in accordance with state procedures. Lucart was escorted into the designated room where officials completed the final procedural requirements before the sentence was carried out. After physical security measures were verified, medical personnel completed the required preparations in accordance with Florida's execution protocol to prepare the pathway for the chemical reaction. The sentence was carried out using Florida's standard execution protocol in accordance with state regulations. Before beginning the chemotherapy, the warden asked Lucart if he wanted to say a last word. Lucart immediately replied, "I'm sorry." Following this brief apology, he read a specific passage from the Christian Bible, quoting Luke chapter 23 verse 34. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Throughout the official proceedings, a priest was present beside the stretcher, praying for the condemned man while prison officials supervised the procedure in accordance with state regulations. After the procedure was completed, officials confirmed that all required protocols had been fulfilled before a medical examiner officially pronounced him dead at 6:19 p.m. A forensic official declared Andrew Richard Lucart dead at 6:19 p.m. The official declaration concluded a legal and criminal process that had lasted exactly 30 years since the crime was first committed in 1996. The successful execution closed the state of Florida's administrative record against Andrew Richard Lucart, removing the perpetrator from the state's death row and completing the statutory punishment. Although the execution was legally complete, the lasting social and psychological impact of the murder continues to affect surviving family members and the community. Resolving the case does not immediately erase the complex traumas associated with the loss of an infant. Sociological analysis of this case highlights a serious warning about child protection measures, serving as a lasting example of the urgent need for thorough scrutiny and complete elimination of the risks associated with entrusting vulnerable children to individuals with a documented history of violent behavior or prior convictions for child abuse. The conclusion of the legal proceedings allows for a final analysis focusing on the memorialization, community impact, and systemic lessons learned from the 1,996 murder case. This section aims to commemorate the victim and offer formal condolences to the mother and surviving family members. The family has borne a heavy psychological burden for 3 decades, not only enduring the permanent loss of their 5-month-old child, but also grappling with persistent guilt and self-reproach. This suffering stems from the fact that the mother unwittingly entrusted her child to a dangerous individual, a decision that led to a tragic outcome. Beyond the personal devastation, the case serves as a stark warning about misplaced trust and systemic complacency in child supervision. A structural analysis of this murder case highlights a fatal error in risk assessment. Entrusting a completely defenseless child to an individual with a history of severe child abuse, whether that individual is a partner, relative, or close acquaintance, represents a grave failure of safety protocols. Case studies in behavioral science indicate that a history of domestic violence does not naturally end without intensive medical intervention, psychological rehabilitation, or close supervision in detention facilities. Lucart's conviction for severe child abuse in 1994 is a clear behavioral indicator of the potential for recidivism. The assumption that a violent individual will change their behavior based on a new relationship or emotional bond often leads to a catastrophic escalation of the situation. Historical data from this case shows that past violent behavior remains one of the most reliable predictors of future criminal behavior. The crucial message regarding child protection drawn from this tragedy underscores preventative vigilance. When managing infant safety, policies of utmost caution and thorough verification must be prioritized over social courtesy or unproven trust. Parents, caregivers, and community oversight bodies must maintain a high state of awareness. There can be no compromise, rationalization, or negligence in assessing any clear history or warning signs of violent behavior in individuals granted access to vulnerable children. Social structures must prioritize child safety above all other family considerations to prevent a recurrence of such predictable consequences.
Dennis Michael Socher's case is nearing its end, with his execution scheduled for July 14, 2026. This execution comes over 40 years after the 1982 New Year's Eve murder of an 18-year-old woman. The subsequent investigation uncovered additional serious criminal offenses connected to the case. This video provides an analytical overview of Dennis Michael Socher's crimes and his attitude as his execution date approaches. We will assess whether Dennis Michael Socher has shown any remorse after 4 decades of imprisonment. To analyze the factors leading to the 1982 murder, it is necessary to consider the perpetrator's background and personal past. Dennis Michael Socher was born in 1951. Originally from Michigan, he later moved to Florida, where he settled and worked as a freelance truck driver. This occupation allowed him extensive travel between different areas. Regarding physical description and behavioral characteristics, investigative reports indicate Socher was robust and muscular. When sober, his public demeanor was described by acquaintances as normal, traditional, and sometimes approachable, allowing him to integrate into social environments without immediately arousing suspicion. However, forensic behavioral analysis revealed that this traditional appearance concealed a history of unstable and aggressive behavior. This latent aggression was constantly triggered and exacerbated whenever he drank alcohol, leading to increasingly unpredictable behavior. Examining Socher's legal status prior to the murder reveals significant points of contact with the criminal justice system. In 1980, he was arrested and charged following an incident in Oakland Park, Florida, involving the abduction and attempted sexual assault of a female victim. He was subsequently convicted. However, instead of serving an immediate long prison sentence, the justice system placed him on supervised probation for 5 years. This probation meant he remained under state supervision but was permitted to live and work in the community under specific conditions determined by the court. This probation presents a crucial point of analysis for investigators and criminologists. Despite his serious history of sexual assault and abduction, Socher retained his freedom of movement. His absence from custody allowed him unrestricted movement on New Year's Eve 1982. His probation terms did not prevent him from entering public spaces, ultimately placing a young, unsuspecting female victim in a dangerous and deadly environment that he was able to exploit. In the early morning of January 1st, 1982, the victim, an 18-year-old girl, was leaving a local bar in Broward County, Florida, with a drunk friend. Dennis Michael Socher approached the two, appearing cooperative and willing to help. He helped safely escort the drunk friend to their car. Socher then invited Patricia Gifford to accompany him to a local restaurant for breakfast and New Year's Eve. Because Gifford had socialized with Socher inside that restaurant the previous evening, and because Socher was accompanied by his younger brother, Gary Socher, she felt the environment was less risky. Therefore, Gifford agreed to get into the commercial van Socher drove for his employer, assuming their destination was a nearby restaurant. The situation immediately changed once the van left the original location. Instead of driving the commercial vehicle toward a public restaurant, Socher drove away from the agreed destination and prevented Gifford from leaving the vehicle. He abruptly changed direction, driving straight west. The destination was a remote, uninhabited area on the geographical edge of the Everglades swamps in Broward County, Florida. As the vehicle ventured deeper into the desolate landscape, Gifford realized she was being kidnapped. She realized something was wrong and repeatedly asked to be released and pleading with Socher to stop and let her leave. Socher ignored her pleas, continuing to drive until they reached a dark, completely uninhabited area with no public lighting or potential witnesses. He then stopped the commercial vehicle and began a physical confrontation. When the car stopped in a remote area of the Everglades, Socher immediately attacked Gifford. He attempted to sexually assault the victim. Despite the sudden attack, the 18-year-old victim actively resisted, struggling to defend herself and escape the car cabin. In this self-defense effort, Gifford used her fingernails to scratch Socher's face, causing noticeable abrasions in an attempt to repel him. This physical resistance triggered a serious escalation of the perpetrator's behavior. According to the later sworn testimony of his brother, Gary Socher, who was present throughout the events, Dennis Socher became uncontrollably enraged. He immediately abandoned his intention to sexually assault her and redirected his physical force to her neck. He then used physical force that resulted in fatal injuries, obstructing her airway. The assault ultimately resulted in the victim's death, leading to death. After confirming the victim had died, Socher proceeded to dispose of the physical evidence of the murder using deliberate methods of concealment. He attempted to remove evidence linking himself to the crime and threw it into the back of the truck. He then restarted the vehicle and drove deeper into the dense bushland and waterlogged terrain characteristic of the Everglades swamp system. This particular geographical area was chosen because of the limited visibility and high density of predatory wildlife, which would accelerate the natural decomposition process and hinder the investigation. Socher removed the body from the vehicle and abandoned the body in a remote swamp area environment to avoid detection by law enforcement search teams. After completing the concealment of the body, Socher drove the truck back to his apartment. Upon arriving, he thoroughly cleaned the car's interior and his personal living space to remove any traces or signs of a struggle, then resumed his daily life without any unusual behavior towards his neighbors or acquaintances. Forensic behavioral analysts examining this particular phase of the sequence of events have pointed to several key elements shaping Socher's method. The initial transition from a seemingly supportive bystander to a captor was based on calculated manipulation of social cues. By exploiting the presence of his brother and established familiarity within the social environment, Socher effectively mitigated the victim's natural defense mechanisms. The choice of a commercial van also provided a highly mobile space, avoiding immediate suspicion on public roads. The abrupt locking of the doors and acceleration toward the west represented a deliberate tactical choice to move the victim away from areas actively patrolled by city police forces, thus isolating the victim in an area where emergency response time would be significantly delayed. The struggle inside the van's cabin provided clear physical evidence of the perpetrator's violent threshold. In many documented cases of sexual assault, physical resistance from the victim may cause the attacker to retreat due to the risk of detection or injury. However, in Socher's case, Gifford's counterattack acted as a catalyst for the act, escalating the incident into a fatal attack. Gary Socher's testimony remains crucial investigative evidence, as it precisely identified the cause of death long before forensic experts could assess any remains. This witness account details the perpetrator's complete loss of behavioral control, characterized by the continued assault even when the victim was no longer able to resist. The post-mortem behavior observed in the hours following the murder reveals the sophistication of the crime and the psychological desensitization involved. The systematic removal of the victim's clothing was a calculated attempt to strip away any fibers, personal belongings, or identification that might link the remains to the location where the victim was last seen alive. Furthermore, the choice of the deep Everglades as the disposal site reflects a practical understanding of local geography and environmental factors that would hinder search and rescue operations. By returning home and immediately cleaning his vehicle and clothing, Socher demonstrated a clear awareness of forensic tracking methods. This deliberate effort to systematically erase physical evidence allowed him to avoid immediate detection within the crucial 48-hour window following the missing person report, leaving investigators with very few initial clues. The transition from the unfolding crime scene to a normal family life further highlights the serious behavioral deviations characteristic of Socher's record. This sequence of events raises fundamental questions about the motive behind this horrific crime and the identity of the unfortunate victim, Patricia Patty Gifford. The victim, Patricia Patty Gifford, was an 18-year-old high school graduate from the local school district. On the night of December 31st, 1981, Gifford left home to celebrate New Year's Eve with a close friend. The two went to the Banana Boat Bar, a popular entertainment venue in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. During this public event, Gifford's presence was observed by Dennis Michael Socher and his brother, Gary Socher, who were also regulars at the bar. This social setting served as the initial target for the perpetrators. Investigative findings and forensic behavioral analysis revealed a series of clear motives for the subsequent kidnapping and murder. Socher's actions stemmed primarily from deeply ingrained deviant behavior and a sudden surge of violent criminal intent stemming from observing the victim's youthful appearance. Furthermore, criminologists point to a crucial structural element. Socher possessed an excessive degree of self-confidence in his crimes. Because his 1980 conviction for kidnapping and attempted sexual assault resulted in a suspended sentence rather than a long prison term, he operated on the assumption that he could avoid severe criminal consequences. This immunity to maximum punishment encouraged him to carry out the physical assault, using deadly force to maintain complete control over the victim of the victim at all costs. Following the initial confrontation, Gifford completely disappeared on the morning of January 1st, 1982, leading to an immediate missing person investigation by local authorities. Since no remains were initially found because the body was hidden in the Everglades, detectives had to reconstruct the events of that evening based on the available evidence. What specific investigative clues and behavioral patterns ultimately linked this violent disappearance to Dennis Michael Socher, helping law enforcement identify him? Following Patricia Gifford's disappearance, law enforcement investigators shifted their focus to tracking down those who had been in contact with her at the Fort Lauderdale entertainment venue. A major breakthrough in the investigation stemmed from photographic evidence. Detectives recovered a photograph taken inside the Banana Boat Bar on the night of December 31st, 1981. This image directly showed Dennis Michael Socher sitting next to Gifford. When local law enforcement broadcast this photograph on regional television networks to appeal for public help, Socher panicked. He immediately fled, abandoning his employer's commercial truck in Tampa, Florida, to sever his physical connection to the vehicle and the geographic location of the crime scene. This initial escape developed into a lengthy, multi-state evasive operation spanning approximately 5 years. During this time, Socher operated under multiple aliases and used forged identification to avoid detection, frequently moving through several states, including Louisiana and Georgia. He sought temporary, cash-paying jobs to minimize his digital and financial footprint. Meanwhile, his brother, Gary Socher, suffered severe psychological distress related to the events he witnessed in the Everglades. Unable to bear the psychological burden of the murder, Gary voluntarily turned himself in to law enforcement, agreeing to cooperate fully with the state investigation, providing detailed witness testimonies describing the victim's strangulation by hand. Despite his best efforts to maintain his false identity, Socher's evasiveness ended due to a minor traffic violation. In May 1986, a Georgia State Patrol officer conducted a routine traffic stop after observing Socher's vehicle failing to obey a red light. During the course of the investigation, law enforcement compared Socher's fingerprints and cross-referenced the data with the National Crime Information Center's database. This biometric verification officially confirmed that the detained individual was a fugitive wanted for premeditated murder in Florida, leading to his immediate arrest and extradition. The subsequent investigation by detectives uncovered a horrific history of serial sexual crimes. A comprehensive background check and interstate record sharing revealed Socher was a serial rapist operating with a highly consistent modus operandi. In 1979, he was charged in Michigan with involvement in the kidnapping, strangulation, and sexual assault of a female victim. This was followed by a conviction in Florida in 1980 for similar offenses. In each case, Socher used physical restraint and handcuffs to subdue his victims, demonstrating a long-standing pattern of severe sexual deviance and physical violence. With a comprehensive criminal record compiled and testimony from his brother, state prosecutors finalized the indictment, transferring Dennis Michael Socher to the judicial system to face trial for premeditated murder. After Dennis Michael Socher was extradited to Florida, the proceedings moved to the trial phase, where the prosecution presented a comprehensive array of evidence to the court. In 1987, the formal trial began, and the prosecution presented several key elements to secure a guilty verdict. The primary physical evidence included 3 separate audio recordings obtained during interrogations conducted by detectives in 1986. In these recordings, Socher clearly confessed to details of his involvement in the kidnapping and murder of the victim. Additionally, the prosecution presented crucial witness testimony from the defendant's younger brother, Gary Socher. Gary provided a detailed, chronological account of the assault and strangulation he witnessed in the Everglades, precisely identifying the mechanism of death for the court. After evaluating the physical evidence, the recorded confession, and witness testimony, the jury deliberated. In 1987, the jury found Socher guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. Under Florida's death penalty law at the time, a unanimous jury was not required to apply the maximum sentence. The jury recommended the death penalty with a 10-2 unanimous vote, with 10 jurors voting in favor of death and 2 in favor of life imprisonment. The presiding judge accepted the recommendation and formally sentenced Dennis Michael Socher to death, transferring him to the state prison system to await execution. This court ruling initiated a complex and protracted legal battle within the appeals system, lasting approximately 40 years. U.S. defense attorneys used the extensive procedural frameworks available under the U.S. death penalty system, filed numerous appeals, post-conviction petitions, and habeas corpus petitions with both the Florida Supreme Court and federal appellate courts. The appeals strategy focused heavily on identifying procedural errors and technical flaws in the original 1987 trial. Specifically, the defense arguments asserted that the jury's instructions regarding split voting were flawed, and that the 10-2 unanimous recommendation violated constitutionally protected rights under modern legal standards. Furthermore, the defense team submitted medical petitions alleging that Socher suffered from a severe mental health impairment, arguing that his cognitive decline disqualified him from execution under state law. The appeals also repeatedly challenged the credibility of Gary Socher's historic testimony, arguing that his brother's testimony was coerced or legally influenced. These ongoing legal proceedings successfully delayed the execution for 4 decades, exhausting every available legal avenue. This prolonged period highlights the structural complexity of protracted death penalty cases, where procedural challenges can delay resolution for decades. With the final rejection of these historic appeals, the legal process has ended. 4 decades of challenging justice with petitions of appeal. Will justice truly be served when the perpetrator is now an old man in his final days? The legal and administrative framework surrounding the Dennis Michael Socher case entered its final stage in June 2026. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis officially signed the death penalty order for Socher, setting the official execution date for July 14, 2026. The mandatory method of execution is lethal injection, to be carried out in a state prison. This administrative milestone follows 44 years of incarceration and legal proceedings since the initial charges were filed in 1982. The issuance of the death penalty order moves the case from a lengthy appeals review phase to the final execution phase under Florida state law. As the execution date approaches, Socher's defense team is actively pursuing last-minute legal moves to seek a stay of execution. The main arguments presented in recent petitions focus on the inmate's current health condition. At age 74, Socher suffered from multiple serious chronic illnesses, including end-stage liver disease. The defense arguments asserted that lethal injection of an elderly person in a severely weakened state constituted cruel and unusual punishment, prohibited under the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. These moves represented a last-ditch procedural effort to disrupt the state's process before the statutory deadline. Despite ongoing legal challenges and decades of questioning, the central investigative mystery of the case remains unsolved. Throughout his time in the execution chamber, Socher remained completely silent about the specific geographical location where he disposed of the victim's body. Consequently, the remains of 18-year-old Patricia Gifford were never found. Her exact resting place remains hidden deep within the dense and inaccessible terrain of the Everglades swamps, where environmental factors may have erased any remaining physical evidence. The failure to locate these remains means the 1982 missing person case file regarding the body's whereabouts remains unresolved, ensuring that resolving the execution will not bring physical peace of mind to the surviving family members of the victim who have faced this unresolved situation for over 44 years. What are your thoughts on this case? Please comment below. I will read them all. Will the upcoming execution take place on the scheduled date?
Dusty Ray Spencer's case is entering its final stages. After more than 30 years in death row, Spencer is scheduled to be executed on June 25, 2026. He was convicted of first-degree murder for assaulting and killing his wife, Karen Spencer, with a brick and knife on January 18, 1992. This video provides a detailed analysis of how domestic violence escalated over time, leading to the murder. Additionally, we will examine the final legal updates before Spencer's execution. A case stemming from domestic violence that was dismissed as a private family matter and downplayed led to the death of an innocent victim. To understand the factors leading to the 1992 murder, it is necessary to consider the context and personal history of the perpetrator. Dusty Ray Spencer was born on February 2, 1952. Prior to the murder, he was a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. After leaving the military, Spencer transitioned to civilian work and built a career as a professional painter. Eventually, he became the owner and operator of a small residential painting business in Florida, registered under the name A+ Painting. Initially, Spencer always presented a very positive public image. Acquaintances and neighbors initially saw him as a capable, hardworking, and considerate businessman and partner. He frequently hosted entertainments, including romantic candlelit dinners on a 36-foot fishing boat he owned and operated, called Dusty's Dream. This boat was regularly moored at Daytona Beach and used for weekend fishing trips, contributing to the image of a stable and successful lifestyle. However, subsequent behavioral analysis and police records revealed that this public image concealed serious domestic instability. Beneath the facade of wealth, Spencer exhibited strong behavioral control. When personal relationships failed to meet his expectations, or when conflict arose, his behavior escalated into severe domestic violence. Investigative records documented a history of physical abuse, including specific incidents where Spencer choked his partner and verbally threatened to kill her. The investigation ultimately revealed how the progression from control to physical assault led to a deadly confrontation. How could a man with a stable business and an organized background destroy his family, escalating his actions into a deadly domestic assault? This case illustrates a pattern of escalating domestic violence, culminating in a fatal attack. In December 1991, the relationship between Dusty Ray Spencer and his wife, Karen Spencer, fractured when Karen filed for divorce. In response, Spencer assaulted his wife, leading to his arrest by local police. He was detained in a county jail awaiting further legal proceedings. During his detention, Spencer used the prisoner telephone system to communicate directly with his wife. In these recorded calls, he made explicit threats, stating that he intended to kill her immediately upon his release. Although these direct threats were reported to law enforcement, authorities did not take any further protective or preventative measures to ensure the victim's safety. During the December holiday, Karen Spencer filed a request for her husband's release so he could go home for Christmas and New Year. The court granted the request, and Spencer was released on bail. Shortly after the holidays ended, the violence resumed. On January 4, 1992, Dusty Spencer launched a second physical attack on his wife in their home. During this altercation, he used a heavy iron as a weapon, repeatedly striking her in the face. Karen Spencer's teenage son was awakened by his mother's screams and intervened, stopping the attack. Following this intervention, Spencer fled the home to avoid arrest. Karen Spencer was taken to a local hospital where paramedics stitched 11 wounds to treat her face. In the days following this incident, law enforcement was unable to obtain an arrest warrant in time, and Spencer remained at large. Karen Spencer reportedly located her husband's residence and provided the address to the police, but no immediate arrests were made due to legal regulations and law enforcement restrictions on domestic violence cases at the time. The final fatal confrontation occurred 2 weeks later, on January 18, 1992. Dusty Spencer secretly returned home to Orange County, Florida. He encountered his wife in the backyard and immediately began assaulting her. Spencer assaulted Karen Spencer using multiple weapons, causing injuries from which she did not survive. While the attack was ongoing, Karen Spencer's 18-year-old son, Timothy Johnson, returned home from school. Upon entering the house, he discovered the attack taking place in the backyard. Timothy ran into the house, grabbed a .22 caliber rifle, and returned outside to protect his mother. Timothy attempted to intervene, but was unable to stop the attack. Facing an immediate threat, he fled to a neighbor's house and called emergency services. Faced with this immediate physical threat, Timothy could only run to a neighbor's house for help and call 911. Emergency medical personnel and Orange County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the scene immediately after receiving the emergency call. Upon entering, authorities confirmed Karen Spencer had succumbed to her injuries and was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators noted multiple stab wounds and severe head trauma. Dusty Spencer had fled the area before the rescue team arrived. When law enforcement officers cordoned off the area and entered the backyard to examine the scene, they noted the presence of the victim's small pet dog, a white poodle named Pebbles. Investigators noted that the family's pet remained beside the victim when they arrived, a detail later documented in official reports. Investigators noted this detail in their initial incident report, describing the immediate aftermath of the murder. Forensic analysis of the crime scene confirmed that the attack occurred entirely in the backyard, and the physical evidence was consistent with witness Timothy Johnson's testimony. The failure to fire prevented further casualties, but it left the victim unable to immediately defend herself against the attacker. The arrival of law enforcement marked the formal transition of the case from a domestic violence report to a murder investigation. The subsequent police response focused primarily on tracing the suspect's movements across county boundaries. Physical evidence collected at the scene, including the brick and knife used in the attack, was cataloged for the prosecution's case. Investigators also recovered a jammed .22 caliber rifle from the scene to verify the teenager's claim of a technical malfunction. The autopsy concluded that the victim died from multiple traumatic injuries sustained during the attack. Investigators concluded that the attack involved significant force and resulted in fatal injuries. This evidence established the basis for a first-degree murder charge, as it demonstrated a deliberate and prolonged attempt to cause death. In the early 1990s, numerous warnings were recorded, and physical attacks did not lead to adequate state intervention. From cell threats to non-lethal assaults with household objects, and finally to a fatal attack with bricks and knives, all occurred over a 6-week period. When police arrived at the Orange County home that night, they discovered the final outcome of an uncontrolled and rapidly escalating cycle of domestic violence, with the victim lying dead on the ground. The victim was Karen Spencer, 40 years old at the time of her death and the only daughter in a family from Burlington, North Carolina. Her record shows she was very independent and intelligent, having built a successful career in the pet care industry since high school. Before entering into a relationship with Dusty Ray Spencer, Karen had gone through a divorce and subsequently raised 3 grown sons alone, completely without any external financial support. When Karen met Dusty Ray Spencer, their relationship initially revolved around shared business interests, particularly their home painting company, A+ Painting. For a time, the couple maintained a stable relationship both professionally and financially. However, behavioral changes occurred when Karen sought a divorce due to increasing marital conflict. Spencer's behavior quickly shifted from cooperative to aggressively controlling, jealous, and possessive, culminating in recorded physical assaults in December 1991 and early January 1992. The final escalation on January 18, 1992, ended the cycle of violence in the relationship. Following the murder of his wife, Spencer immediately fled the jurisdiction, leading to a multi-county pursuit by law enforcement. Following the murder on January 18, 1992, Dusty Ray Spencer immediately fled the law, using his vehicle to escape the jurisdiction of Orange County, Florida. Investigative reports tracked his initial journey south to Kissimmee, a city known for the location of Walt Disney World. Surveillance data and witness testimony subsequently revealed a remarkable detail about his behavior during this escape. While actively evading law enforcement, Spencer drove into the self-service lane at a local McDonald's restaurant, where he typically ordered an Egg McMuffin and fries for breakfast. This routine purchase occurred shortly after the incident, drawing investigators' attention to his behavior during the early stages of the investigation. The large-scale manhunt ended 48 hours after the crime scene was discovered. Law enforcement's tracking and intelligence systems led investigators out of Orange County to neighboring Polk County, Florida. On January 20th, 1992, tactical units of the Polk County Sheriff's Office, based on specific information about the suspect's whereabouts, successfully surrounded a residential property. Spencer had been using this location, owned by an acquaintance, as a temporary refuge. Police officers established a security perimeter around the house to prevent any further escape attempts. Spencer was apprehended and taken into custody without further violent resistance, effectively ending his two-day hideout. Forensic analysis of the perpetrator's background revealed a clear set of psychological and structural motivations that drove the crime. The main psychological factors identified by investigators were severe obsessive jealousy, extreme selfishness, and a complete inability to accept his wife's decision to divorce. Spencer exhibited deep-seated violent tendencies that had accumulated over a long period within his family environment. Furthermore, this personal pathology was exacerbated by structural shortcomings in the contemporary legal system. In the early 1990s, the legal framework and law enforcement generally treated domestic violence as private family disputes rather than serious crimes. This systemic indifference created a lack of timely accountability, allowing Spencer's violent behavior to escalate without significant legal intervention. As a result, his desire for absolute control over his wife intensified, ultimately leading to a fatal criminal act. Spencer's handcuffing officially marked the end of his escape and the beginning of the legal proceedings. Following the arrest, responsibility for the case shifted from the sheriff's surveillance and arrest units to state prosecutors. The state gathered physical evidence from the crime scene, testimony from the victim's son, and behavioral evidence collected during the 2 days the suspect was on the run to build a comprehensive case file. Spencer was transferred to a secure detention facility to await his formal trial, where he will face statutory penalties related to first-degree murder under Florida state law. After Dusty Ray Spencer's arrest, the case was transferred to the judicial system, beginning a legal process that lasted more than 3 decades. In November 1992, the trial officially began, and the jury evaluated the physical evidence and witness testimony presented by the state prosecution. The jury reached a guilty verdict, convicting Spencer of first-degree murder in the death of his wife. On December 21, 1992, the trial court officially sentenced him to death. Under Florida law at the time, a unanimous jury decision was not a prerequisite for the death penalty. The death sentence was recommended based on a 7-5 split vote among the jurors, with 7 voting in favor of death and 5 voting in favor of life imprisonment. Following the initial sentencing, appeals lawyers began the appeals process following the standard sentencing. These initial appeals led to a restructuring of the sentencing phase, resulting in a formal resentencing hearing held on January 18, 1995. During these proceedings, the defense presented mitigating circumstances aimed at reducing the sentence. However, after considering the statutory aggravating circumstances, specifically the intentional and severe nature of the offense, the court determined that the aggravating circumstances outweighed the mitigating circumstances. Therefore, the judicial body upheld the original decision, and Spencer was sentenced to death for the second time. Throughout the following decades, Spencer's defense team continuously filed appeals and petitions to both state and federal appellate courts to reduce the sentence to life imprisonment without parole. The defense's arguments focused primarily on 3 areas. First, they presented medical and psychological reports demonstrating that Spencer, as a veteran, suffered chronic psychological trauma stemming from severe childhood abuse. Second, they presented neurological evidence showing Spencer sustained severe organic brain damage that impaired his ability to control his behavior. Third, the appeals focused primarily on the constitutionality of the original sentencing mechanism. The defense argued that executing a prisoner based on a 7-5 jury verdict was fundamentally flawed and structurally unfair when judged by modern U.S. legal standards, which now require a 1-2-0 jury unanimous decision for the death penalty. Although appeals efforts are ongoing, higher courts have repeatedly affirmed the verdict and the legality of the punishment under the law in effect at the time of the crime. More than 34 years have passed since the original 1992 trial concluded, during which time Spencer has remained incarcerated in the high-security environment of the Florida state prison system. This case illustrates how changes in death penalty laws over the decades can affect past sentences, creating a lengthy gap between trial and final verdict. As these legal challenges reached their statutory deadlines, the focus shifted to the executive branch of the state government to determine the final outcome. With the conclusion of these protracted legal proceedings, the administrative timeline for execution has been formally established, raising questions regarding the prisoner's final status. Dusty Ray Spencer's legal and administrative status reached a critical turning point in early 2026. On May 26, 2026, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis officially signed the death warrant for Spencer, scheduling his execution by lethal injection for June 25, 2026. At age 74, Spencer's execution marks a significant milestone in the state's penal history, as his death will make him the oldest death row inmate to be executed since the death penalty was reinstated in Florida. This administrative action concludes a lengthy period of detention following his 1992 conviction, moving the case from the appeals phase to the final stage of the legal process. Beyond the immediate administrative consequences for the perpetrator, the Karen Spencer murder is also a major catalyst for fundamental legislative restructuring within Florida's legal framework. Prior to this case, statutory restrictions severely limited how law enforcement agencies responded to domestic conflicts. Historically, police viewed domestic violence as a private family matter rather than a crime against the state. Under outdated legal standards, patrol officers could not immediately make arrests for domestic violence unless there were neutral witnesses directly involved in the altercation, or if an arrest warrant had been issued before officers arrived at the scene. This legal framework often left victims vulnerable to escalating violence when the abuser remained at the scene after police left. In direct response to the documented failures surrounding the death of Karen Spencer, Florida legislators enacted comprehensive legal reforms, permanently altering the processes for handling domestic violence. Newly enacted laws have granted law enforcement officers clear legal authority to make immediate arrests without a warrant at the scene of a domestic dispute if physical evidence or visible injuries provide reasonable grounds to believe assault occurred, regardless of whether witnesses were present at the attack. Furthermore, the state has implemented mandatory arrest policies, requiring officers to apprehend the principal aggressor even if the victim requests to withdraw the complaint or refuses to cooperate with prosecution. The state also increased funding to expand the network of safe shelters and strengthen enforcement mechanisms for domestic violence bans to ensure that court-issued protections are immediately criminally penalized if violated. Regarding systemic impact, the Karen Spencer murder case demonstrated the deadly risks associated with the inaction of the courts and the delays of the bureaucracy in domestic violence cases. Although this historic event led to a tragic end for a mother and business owner, the subsequent legislative response established a protective legal precedent that directly influenced thousands of subsequent domestic violence interventions. This case serves as a case study in criminal justice analysis, demonstrating that administrative silence or institutional indifference to early warning signs facilitates the escalation of violence, thereby establishing systemic accountability as a necessity for public safety. What are your thoughts on the final legal developments in this case? Do you believe Spencer ever accepted responsibility for his actions? Please leave your comments below. I will read them all. Today's video details 4 particularly serious, tragic legal cases in Florida's history that led to maximum judicial penalties. We will analyze the strict legal process and the forensic investigations that brought these high-profile cases to justice and law enforcement officers on duty. Each of these charges resulted in a death sentence in Florida, a jurisdiction known for its strict death penalty framework. These high-profile cases garnered significant public attention and led to lengthy appeals reviews before the final execution order was passed by the justice system. This video will analyze the precise nature of the crimes committed by these 4 defendants, trace the lengthy legal processes following their arrest, and record their final statements and last meals requested before execution. Thank you for watching and analyzing these cases. Please share your thoughts on these cases in the comments below for further discussion. Please like and subscribe to the channel to receive automatic notifications about upcoming executions. The execution of Mark Dean Schwab on the 1st of July 2008 marked a significant turning point in Florida's capital punishment history. Schwab was sentenced to death after being convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and the sexual assault of 1-year-old Johnny Rios Martinez Jr. in 1991. The execution garnered widespread public and media attention because it was the first time Florida had carried out a capital execution by lethal injection after a long moratorium imposed by state law. This moratorium was in place to assess the constitutionality and humanitarian aspects of the chemical process used in the execution. But who was Mark Dean Schwab? Born in 1968, Mark Dean Schwab was an individual with a prior felony record. Prior to the 1991 incident, Schwab had served time in prison for severe offenses against minors and was granted early parole that same spring. Case files show that shortly after his release, Schwab began searching for other targets through local media, eventually identifying his victim. The victim, Johnny Rios Martinez Jr., was an active 1-year-old from Cocoa, Florida, who participated in local junior baseball and professional surfing. On the 18th of April, 1991, Schwab lured the boy into a rented truck under the guise of a sports sponsorship opportunity. Later, forensic evidence confirmed that the victim was taken to a remote location, assaulted, and killed to eliminate a witness. As the execution date approached, a large crowd of citizens, legal observers, and family supporters gathered outside the state detention facility. While some were present to watch the execution, many others assembled to commemorate the young victim in a solemn ceremony. The legal proceedings leading to this administrative conclusion spanned more than 16 years, involving numerous appeals by the defense regarding Schwab's psychiatric record and challenges to the state's lethal injection procedures. Ultimately, the appeals courts paved the way for the execution. From a criminal justice perspective, the Schwab case is a crucial point of reference concerning the integration of victim protection, institutional accountability, and the administration of capital punishment within the framework of U.S. law. So, what were the details of this horrific case involving a child victim? Let's examine it now. The events surrounding Mark Dean Schwab's crimes began in mid-March 1991, clearly demonstrating meticulous preparation, target selection, and planned execution. This process started when Schwab saw a photograph of 1-year-old Johnny Rios Martinez Jr. in a local Brevard County newspaper. The article highlighted the victim's recent athletic achievements in local youth sports, specifically baseball and surfing. This provided Schwab with the essential information needed to identify the child's name, location, and specific personal interests, which he then used to construct a fraudulent story to target the victim. After identifying his initial target, Schwab contacted the Rios Martinez family directly by phone. In these conversations, Schwab used a false identity, posing as a professional reporter and journalist who was supposedly interested in writing a follow-up article about the boy's athletic achievements and promising future in sports. This false persona served two purposes. It validated his persistent questions about the child's daily routines and successfully bypassed the victim's family's natural defensive instincts. For weeks, Schwab maintained regular contact with the family, building a relationship of trust, creating a false sense of security, and fostering confidence in both the child and his parents. The execution of the plan took place on the afternoon of the 18th of April 1991, immediately after school. Before approaching the victim, Schwab prepared a logistical setup by renting a U-Haul truck, a type of enclosed vehicle specifically chosen for its ability to conceal movement and transport goods without attracting attention. Schwab intercepted Johnny Rios Martinez Jr. after school, offering a specific, highly targeted reward designed to exploit the child's sporting interests. He made a deceptive offer, claiming he had secured a lucrative commercial advertising and sponsorship deal with a major surfing company in the area. Based on the trust built up in the preceding weeks, the victim was tricked into getting into the rented U-Haul, under the assumption that he was engaging in a legitimate business opportunity related to his sporting activities. As soon as the victim entered the enclosed cargo compartment of the vehicle, Schwab immediately changed course, driving away from the familiar urban area of Cocoa, Florida, and toward a predetermined, remote rural location. The choice of this secluded environment was a deliberate, tactical decision to minimize the possibility of public intervention, eliminate potential witnesses, and ensure that any distress signals would not be detected by law enforcement or passers-by. Upon reaching the remote location, Schwab used restraint and coercion to maintain control, committing a severe and unlawful offense against the young victim. Following the sexual assault, Schwab shifted from restraint to disposal. He realized the victim could easily identify him to law enforcement and her family, thereby directly linking him to the kidnapping and securing the revocation of his parole, along with new, serious criminal charges. Schwab made the decision to eliminate the witness, resulting in the tragic loss of the victim's life. Subsequent forensic analysis confirmed that the cause of death was directly linked to this unlawful act of containment, and the lack of self-defense wounds or secondary injuries suggested a rapid escalation from restraint to the use of deadly force. After the victim's death, Schwab immediately proceeded with concealment procedures to delay discovery and disrupt the missing person investigation. He prepared a heavy wooden chest to use as the primary container for hiding the body. Schwab placed the victim's body inside the chest, sealing the lid tightly to conceal the physical evidence from being discovered. He then transported the chest to a nearby body of water, submerging it completely in an attempt to hide the evidence and disrupt the ongoing forensic investigation. Roy forensic evidence and ensure the permanent disposal of the body. From a criminal justice and investigative perspective, the events of this case demonstrate a meticulously planned violent crime, with the perpetrator exploiting publicly available information and undertaking a lengthy preparation process. The use of a rented commercial vehicle and a pre-purchased container suggests that Schwab did not act on momentary instinct, but rather operated within a highly organized logistical framework. The transition from identity theft and fraud to kidnapping, sexual assault, and premeditated murder reveals a meticulously planned crime, where each step was designed to facilitate the next, culminating in a systematic effort to evade law enforcement detection by completely eliminating key witnesses and concealing evidence. The investigation into the case began immediately after a report of the disappearance of one-year-old Johnny Rios Martinez Jr. On the 18th of April, 1991, initial investigations conducted by local police officers at the sports arena yielded crucial witness testimony. Several witnesses present at the baseball stadium stated they saw the victim approach and then enter a commercial delivery truck. The driver was described by witnesses as a tall, adult male. More importantly, witnesses identified the specific make of the vehicle, noting that it was a typical rental U-Haul truck. This specific detail provided investigators with an immediate and viable clue, allowing them to narrow their investigation down to commercial rental truck fleets operating in the Brevard County area. With the vehicle description, detectives contacted local rental companies to cross-reference transactions that occurred on or just before April 18th. The rental company's administrative tracking system quickly yielded a match. Records showed a U-Haul truck matching the witness description had been legally rented to Mark Dean Schwab. After identifying the prime suspect, law enforcement issued a wanted notice across multiple jurisdictions to locate both the vehicle and Schwab. However, realizing local authorities were actively pursuing him, Schwab immediately fled Florida, using the interstate highway network to travel north, back to his home state of Ohio, in an attempt to evade capture and disrupt the local investigation. Upon arriving in Ohio, Schwab attempted to establish a logistical and psychological safety net by contacting a family member. He called his maternal aunt, offering an incredibly complex and fabricated plea of innocence. During this conversation, Schwab claimed he had been coerced into participating in the child's abduction. He alleged that a man named Donald was the mastermind behind the crime and had threatened to kill Schwab's mother if Schwab didn't comply with the abduction order. This fabricated story was a deliberate attempt to shift primary criminal responsibility and position himself as a victim of blackmail rather than the sole perpetrator of a serious crime. However, his family members were not easily convinced. Recognizing the serious legal and ethical consequences of the call, The aunt immediately contacted local law enforcement to report Schwab's communication and disclosure of information. She agreed to cooperate fully with federal investigators and allowed law enforcement technicians to install wiretaps on her home telephone line. This wiretap allowed professional detectives to record subsequent conversations in real time and prepare electronic tracking mechanisms to monitor the physical origin of any signals coming from the suspect. The breakthrough in the investigation occurred on the 21st of April 1991, when Schwab called his aunt back. As the conversation continued, the wiretap technicians successfully intercepted the transmission, tracing the signal directly to a specific public telephone location in a small Ohio municipality. Field units positioned in the vicinity were deployed to the coordinates provided by the surveillance team. Officers stormed the scene, identified Schwab, and apprehended him without further incident, effectively ending his escape. Following the arrest, the focus of the operation shifted to collecting and preserving physical evidence to build a solid forensic case for the prosecution. Search and rescue teams found the wooden chest that Schwab had submerged, recovering the victim's remains. The chest was carefully examined by forensic technicians for potential fingerprint evidence. Analysis in a specialized laboratory successfully detected a series of potentially identifiable fingerprints on the adhesive surface of the super-adhesive tape used to seal the chest's interior. Comparative analysis of these fingerprints revealed a complete match with known fingerprint patterns of Mark Dean Schwab. From a forensic scientific standpoint, the presence of friction marks on the inner adhesive surface of the tape provided irrefutable physical evidence of direct use, proving that Schwab personally manipulated the adhesive materials used during the concealment phase. This physical evidence effectively refuted his earlier defenses of being coerced, directly linking him to the physical actions of the murder and forming the basis for the subsequent slated prosecution for premeditated murder. Analysis of Mark Dean Schwab's criminal record reveals a history of severe behavioral issues and previous dangerous offenses involving minors. Prior to the 1991 murder, he had been convicted and imprisoned for sexually assaulting a 13-year-old boy. Court records show Schwab served over 3 years before being released early in March 1991. Upon returning to the community, instead of undergoing successful rehabilitation, Schwab immediately resumed his old behaviors, actively seeking a new minor target, which ultimately led to the abduction and murder of Johnny Rios Martinez Jr. shortly after his release. Immediately after his recapture, Schwab's legal proceedings began with his trial in 1992. During the determination of guilt, the prosecution presented a comprehensive case focused on irrefutable physical and forensic evidence. The prosecution's key evidence was Schwab's latent fingerprints, collected from the adhesive side of the tape used to secure the victim's body inside the wooden chest. This evidence demonstrated direct physical interference that the defense could not mitigate. Consequently, the jury needed less than 2 hours of deliberation to reach a guilty verdict of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. During sentencing, the 12-member jury unanimously voted 12-0 to recommend the death penalty, a decision upheld by the trial judge and formally sentencing Schwab to death. The execution process dragged on for over a decade due to complex constitutional challenges. In 2007, the governor of Florida signed Schwab's initial execution order. However, the scheduled procedure was abruptly halted by court intervention. At the time, the U.S. Supreme Court was considering a broader constitutional challenge concerning lethal injection procedures across multiple states. Schwab's case was suspended pending this landmark ruling. After the Supreme Court issued a ruling declaring standard lethal injection methods constitutional, Florida lifted the suspension, rescheduled the execution, and officially carried out the death sentence in 2008. Before the execution, prison procedures for death row inmates were strictly followed. For his last meal request, Schwab ordered a large pizza topped with Italian sausage and pepperoni, a box of vanilla ice cream and chocolate chips, and a bottle of Coca-Cola. After completing his meal and final administrative procedures, Schwab was led into the execution chamber. When the guards gave him the opportunity to make a formal final statement before the witnesses and defense attorneys present behind the glass, Schwab refused to speak. He remained completely silent, offering no acknowledgement, apology, or final comment throughout the entire process of the lethal injection and until the medical staff officially declared him dead. Next, Richard Henyard was executed on the 23rd of September 2008, bringing to a close a horrific murder case that shocked public opinion in the state of Florida. Henyard faced the maximum sentence after being convicted of multiple felony charges, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and armed robbery. Following his execution by lethal injection, the fathers of the victims gave scheduled public statements, speaking about the case being resolved and the lasting impact of the loss on the surviving family members. Who was the mastermind behind this horrific crime? Richard Henyard, born in 1975, committed the crime at the age of 18 years and 2 months, the age at which, under Florida state law, he is considered an adult criminally liable. His accomplice, Alphonsa Smalls, was 14 at the time of the incident. Due to juvenile protection regulations and the death penalty, Smalls was not eligible for the death penalty and therefore received a life sentence without parole. These two juvenile criminals targeted 3 members of the family: Dorothy Lewis, the owner and driver of the vehicle that was stopped, and her 2 young daughters. In the sequence of events, Miss Lewis was abducted, sexually assaulted, and shot. Despite her serious injuries, she survived and later provided crucial witness testimony to the state. Her 2 daughters, 7-year-old Jamelia Lewis and 3-year-old Jasmine Lewis, were both shot and killed in the final stages of the abduction. The case underwent extensive appeals, with defense lawyers challenging Henyard's sentence on the grounds that he was close to adolescence and arguments related to emotional development. Appeals courts repeatedly rejected these appeals, citing the calculated nature of the armed robbery and the execution-style killing of the children. The 2008 execution became a key point of reference in regional criminal justice discussions concerning standard sentencing for adults, liability for multiple defendant murders, and the administration of victim protection structures in death penalty proceedings. Let's examine the details of how this case unfolded. Late on the night of the last day of January 1993, Richard Henyard and his accomplice, Alphonsa Smalls, committed their crime. The initial phase of their criminal operation began when 8-year-old Henyard illegally obtained a handgun from a close family friend, thus acquiring a dangerous weapon for the robbery. Seeking an accomplice, Henyard approached 4-year-old Alphonsa Smalls and persuaded him to participate in the planned armed robbery. The two then began patrolling the local area, searching for vulnerable targets to apprehend and exploit for financial gain or theft. The target selection phase culminated when Henyard and Smalls observed Dorothy Lewis and her 2 young daughters, ages 7 and 3, entering a public parking lot. Henyard, brandishing the stolen handgun, approached the family and used intimidation to gain control of the situation. He forced Mrs. Lewis and her children into their family car, eliminating any chance of escape or outside help. After the victims were securely bound inside the passenger compartment, Henyard instructed his juvenile accomplice, Smalls, to sit in the driver's seat. Under Henyard's direction, Smalls drove the stolen car out of town, deliberately moving to a more remote area to minimize the chances of being intercepted by law enforcement. During the abduction phase, the psychological pressure on the victims was immense. Case records show that as the car moved deeper into unfamiliar territory, Mrs. Lewis tried to plead with her captors for her family's safety, but the suspects refused any leniency, maintaining absolute control over the detained family members during the transport. This dialogue, later recorded in court documents, reveals a deliberate intention to eliminate any hope of leniency and establish absolute psychological dominance over the detained family members during the transport. The incident escalated when Smalls parked the car in a remote, uninhabited rural area. Henyard and Smalls then committed a severe assault against Mrs. Lewis. Physical evidence presented in court later confirmed the extent of the actions taken against her, while her children remained confined nearby, unable to intervene. As Mrs. Lewis attempted to resist and defend herself, Henyard escalated the violence. He forcefully pushed her from the trunk onto the dirt road to completely subdue her. After Mrs. Lewis lay on the ground, Henyard used the weapon against Mrs. Lewis to eliminate her as a witness to the crime. Believing she was no longer a threat to their escape, Henyard and Smalls then moved away from the scene. After believing the primary adult witness had been neutralized, Henyard and Smalls began the final phase of their crime involving two young children, 7-year-old Jamalia and 3-year-old Jasmine. The two defendants got into a car with the two girls and drove to a different location, far from the scene of the initial attack. Upon arriving at the second location, Henyard removed the children from the vehicle, leading to the fatal outcome. The defendants then attempted to conceal the evidence near the area to delay law enforcement's discovery and attempt to delay detection by passers-by or search teams. From an analytical perspective, the unfolding of this case demonstrates a rapid and severe escalation from property crime to mass murder. The initial goal of a simple robbery transformed into a complex chain of crimes encompassing kidnapping, aggravated sexual assault, attempted murder, and double first-degree murder. Henyard's logistical decisions, such as stealing the gun beforehand, recruiting a young accomplice to drive, moving the victims across the legal boundary to a remote area, using lethal force to silence the mother, and using a separate annex to kill the children, demonstrate a structured method of accomplishing the crimes undetected. The separation of the crime scenes shows a calculated effort to manage the logistics of the murders, ensuring that physical evidence remains dispersed to complicate any subsequent reconstruction by law enforcement officials. The execution of this meticulously planned operation was disrupted by a grave anomaly: the unexpected survival of the primary target. Despite being hit by 4 direct gunshots at close range, Dorothy Lewis miraculously survived at the remote crime scene. In a series of crucial events that completely shifted the direction of the law enforcement investigation, she remained conscious and managed to crawl from the remote rural area to a public road to find moving vehicles and signal for emergency assistance. Her survival transformed her from an identified victim into a vital surviving witness. After stabilizing her condition, law enforcement immediately gathered valuable intelligence detailing the suspect and the specific make, model, and license plate of the stolen vehicle. Based on this real-time data, local and regional police agencies immediately deployed a large-scale tactical response. Authorities established security perimeters, deployed widespread broadcast alerts, and blocked major traffic routes in an effort to locate the vehicle before the perpetrator could leave the area. While law enforcement rapidly mobilized its pursuit network, the perpetrator failed to maintain basic operational security measures. That evening, instead of focusing on evasion or concealment, Henyard and his 14-year-old accomplice, Alphonsa Smalls, moved to the home of a mutual acquaintance. Once in this social setting, Henyard boasted openly. He publicly declared to the household that he had just dealt with a woman falsely claiming the extreme violence was a necessary response because the victim had attempted to disarm and steal his weapon. However, this fabricated story was quickly exposed by observable physical evidence on his person. The sister of his underage accomplice visually identified incriminating physical evidence on Henyard's clothing, raising immediate suspicion about his involvement in a violent altercation. When directly questioned by family members about the source of the biological material, Henyard hastily fabricated a second story, insisting he had only suffered a knife cut. This blatant deception, combined with rapid intelligence from the community and a police manhunt, significantly accelerated the investigation. Law enforcement units, using vehicle tracking data and witness testimony, quickly tracked the suspect's movements after the incident. In an extremely short period, tactical units pinpointed their location and executed a coordinated arrest procedure, bringing both Henyard and Smalls to the police station without any further escalation of violence. The underlying motive behind this multi-victim criminal case stemmed from a mundane and simple transactional goal: stealing property through armed carjacking to facilitate interstate travel and recreational activities. According to investigative records and subsequent court documents, Richard Henyard needed a motor vehicle to carry out a personal, non-essential itinerary. His primary objective was to travel to a nightclub in Orlando, Florida, and then continue south to visit his father in South Florida. To achieve this goal, Henyard devised a meticulously calculated and extremely dangerous plan of action before the actual incident occurred. The plan for this crime was simple yet absolute. He intended to intercept a suitable vehicle, kill the registered owner to eliminate any crucial witnesses, and conceal the deceased's body in the trunk. This strategy was specifically designed to allow him unrestricted use of the stolen vehicle, while delaying the prosecution of the missing person case or the investigation of the murder until he successfully completed his intended route. Following the arrest and investigation confirming the crimes of Richard Henyard and his accomplices, the 1994 trial officially commenced. The prosecution relied heavily on direct witness testimony and absolute physical evidence. The most crucial element in presenting the evidence was the testimony in court of the surviving mother, Dorothy Lewis, who detailed the events of the abduction, sexual assault, and subsequent shootings. This testimony was corroborated by comprehensive forensic analysis, ballistic data, and medical reports that were entirely consistent with witness testimony. Consequently, the court convicted Henyard of all charges, and he was formally sentenced to death. In contrast, his accomplice, Alphonsa Smalls, was subject to different legal guidelines due to his age of 14 at the time of the crime. Under current state and federal laws regarding juvenile offenders, Smalls was ineligible for the death penalty and was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Following the initial verdict in 1994, the case entered a 14-year appeals phase, characterized by fierce challenges from Henyard's defense team. The defense argued that because Henyard was exactly 18 years and 2 months old when the crime was committed, he had only just crossed the legal threshold of adulthood. However, state and federal appeals courts reviewed and rejected these appeals. The courts emphasized that the crime was committed in a calculated, premeditated, and cold-blooded manner, demonstrating the level of criminal intent and situational awareness of an adult. The appeals courts upheld the original sentence and maintained the validity of the death penalty. After 14 years of imprisonment, the execution date of the 23rd of September 2008 arrived, with the prison regulations regarding standard procedures for death row inmates being followed. Henyard submitted his last meal request, which included fried chicken, French fries, a salad with French dressing, a slice of cake, and a can of soda. After finishing his meal, Henyard was escorted to the execution chamber. When given the opportunity by prison officials to make a formal final statement, Henyard used his last words to address witnesses and the families of the victims, saying, "I want to apologize for the pain I have caused, but I did not kill anyone. I hope you find peace." Immediately after the sentencing, the lethal injection procedure began and the sentence was carried out. John Richard Merrick was executed on the 19th of August 2009, bringing to a close a gruesome murder case that had spanned more than 2 decades in the Florida justice system. Merrick was formally sentenced to death after being convicted of first-degree kidnapping and murder. Subsequent legal proceedings and investigative documents determined that the case was a closely coordinated, opportunistic crime targeting a public transport driver. The main perpetrator was John Richard Merrick, born in 1961. Criminal records and court transcripts identified Merrick as the mastermind and primary planner of the kidnapping and subsequent murder. Another individual, Raymond Wigley, was involved, serving a direct accomplice throughout the crime. During the initial trial, while Merrick received the death penalty, Wigley was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Wigley's imprisonment ended in 2000 when he was fatally stabbed by another inmate during an altercation inside the state prison. The victim in this case was Adela Marie Simmons, a 27-year-old woman. On the night of the incident, Simmons was driving on the Florida Turnpike, a major regional highway network, on her way home. Her car broke down, forcing her to pull over to the side of the road. This breakdown created a momentary vulnerability, which Merrick and Wigley exploited to approach the victim under the guise of feigned help, then turning it into a forced abduction. From an analytical perspective, the Merrick case is a prime example of premeditated murder, in which the perpetrator takes advantage of the random elements of the situation to commit the crime. This case required extensive forensic reconstruction to determine the individual responsibility of Merrick and Wigley, making it a crucial point of reference in Florida's legal history concerning multi-defendant crimes and the application of the death penalty to masterminds and premeditated murders. The physical sequence and chronological order of the crime committed by John Richard Merrick and his accomplice Raymond Wigley began late on the night of the 17th of June, 1983. The victim, 27-year-old Adela Marie Simmons, was driving on the Florida Turnpike, a major high-speed highway across Florida. On her way to her destination, her vehicle experienced a sudden technical malfunction, forcing her to pull over to the dark side of the road. At this point, Miss Simmons was isolated and had no immediate means of contacting emergency services, creating a highly vulnerable situation. While the victim was stranded on the side of the road, John Richard Merrick and Raymond Wigley were patrolling the same highway in their vehicle. Upon observing Miss Wigley, Simmons and her broken-down vehicle, the two men decided to change course and approach her. Initially, they approached the victim using a classic deception tactic, creating the false impression that they were kind drivers, stopping to assist with repairs or take the victim to a service station. This behavioral manipulation successfully neutralized the victim's immediate self-defense instincts. Once close, Merrick and Wigley abandoned the trickery, using force and threats of violence to subdue Miss Simmons, forcing her into the vehicle and beginning the illegal transport away from the original scene on the highway. Following the initial abduction, the case file documents a period of captivity lasting over 3 continuous hours. During this lengthy transport, the victim was held captive in the moving vehicle, constantly subjected to psychological terror and verbal threats to prevent any attempts at escape or signaling. Merrick and Wigley traveled along regional routes to maintain mobility, while determining the optimal location to carry out the next stages of their criminal plan. The prolonged period of captivity indicates a phase of continuous control, in which the perpetrator maintained absolute control over the victim's surroundings, systematically isolating the victim from any potential interference from law enforcement or passers-by. The operational phase shifted to a fixed location when the perpetrator drove to an abandoned lifeguard tower located on a secluded beach area. This location was chosen because it was completely dark, geographically remote, and completely deserted in the early morning. After removing Miss Simmons from the vehicle and moving her inside the abandoned structure, Merrick and Wigley significantly escalated the level of physical violence. Forensic evidence and subsequent trial documents confirmed that the victim suffered a severe, systematic physical assault in which she was brutally beaten. Inside the abandoned structure, the victim was subjected to prolonged confinement and severe physical mistreatment. The reconstruction of the crime scene revealed that the violence extended beyond sexual assault to include explicit acts of physical humiliation. Specifically, investigative reports noted that the perpetrators subjected the victim to targeted physical degradation while she was restrained. This severe level of mistreatment demonstrated a calculated pattern of abuse designed to inflict maximum harm before the crime was completed. The final stage of the crime occurred inside the same abandoned emergency tower. After completing the sexual assault and physical abuse, the perpetrators collectively decided to dispose of the victim to prevent her identification by law enforcement. The medical examiner later determined that the cause of death was due to a deliberate act of containment, which fatally compromised the victim's vital signs at the scene. From a criminological and analytical perspective, the events of the Merrick and Wigley case illustrate a characteristic structured method of mass murder or opportunistic premeditated killings. The crime begins with the exploitation of a random environmental factor, a driver stranded on a dark highway, and quickly escalates into a highly organized sequence of actions including prolonged abduction, psychological coercion, and premeditated capital offenses. The choice of an abandoned emergency tower demonstrates a clear understanding of local geography and a calculated intent to find a safe, unsupervised environment to carry out acts of violence without risk of detection. The transition from roadside scams to outright vandalism within 3 hours suggests a cooperative criminal dynamic in which both parties fuel the escalation of violence, culminating in a deliberate attempt to evade detection by completely eliminating a key witness. The formal investigation phase began immediately after Adela Marie Simmons' body was found inside an abandoned beach lifeguard tower. Following the sealing off of the scene, local law enforcement and homicide detectives conducted a large-scale search of the area. This investigation focused primarily on interviewing and reviewing records of any individuals exhibiting suspicious behavior in the beach area, as well as gathering reports of unusual or erratic vehicle movements along the Florida Turnpike during the hours of the abduction. Analysis and tracking of data regarding the body and vehicles quickly yielded crucial investigative clues, leading to the coordinated arrest of John Richard Merrick and his accomplice Raymond Wigley. During the execution of search warrants and the handling of the suspects, law enforcement recovered clear, incriminating physical evidence. This physical evidence included several personal items belonging to the victim that had been taken from her person and vehicle during the crime. Furthermore, crime scene technicians successfully collected and analyzed biological evidence directly from inside the emergency tower, creating an irrefutable forensic link, proving the presence of both suspects at the scene of the murder. The proceedings required the state to conduct 2 separate criminal trials to independently assess the criminal responsibility of each defendant. In these separate legal proceedings, both Merrick and Wigley's defense strategies relied heavily on blaming and shifting responsibility to each other. Each defendant gave contradictory testimony in court, admitting to being present at the scene but completely blaming the other for the fatal strangulation in order to mitigate their personal responsibility for premeditated murder. However, the prosecution presented the jury with a comprehensive reconstruction of the events and physical evidence. Based on the presentation of forensic data, witness testimony regarding post-crime conduct, and the crime scene layout, the jury determined that Merrick was the mastermind and perpetrator of the violence. The court's conclusion showed that Merrick displayed a higher degree of control and calculation throughout the 3 hours of illegal captivity and the final offenses against the victim. Therefore, the jury sentenced Merrick to death, while Wigley was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The analysis of the motive confirmed that the crime stemmed from opportunistic sexual assault and theft. There was no prior relationship between the perpetrator and the victim. Miss Simmons became the suspect's target purely due to random environmental factors, specifically a car breakdown on public transport. From a criminological perspective, the investigation and subsequent trial underscored the crucial role of physical evidence recovery and biometric matching in refuting the defendant's contradictory testimony. Although no witnesses survived inside the tower, the physical evidence allowed the justice system to differentiate between the various levels of culpability, ensuring that the mastermind behind this premeditated murder received the maximum sentence under Florida state law. The 1984 trial of John Richard Merrick presented significant legal complexities due to conflicting defenses from both defendants. Throughout the initial stages of the trial, Merrick and Raymond Wigley repeatedly blamed each other, each claiming the other was the mastermind behind the strangulation of Adela Marie Simmons. After analyzing the case structure and the circumstances of the crime scene, the jury determined that Merrick was the mastermind and acted with a greater degree of brutality. Consequently, Merrick was sentenced to death, while Wigley received a life sentence. Following the initial verdict, the case entered a lengthy appeals process spanning 25 years. Merrick repeatedly filed appeals for leniency after his conviction and requested a retrial, citing mitigating factors such as a troubled family life, difficult childhood, and documented substance abuse issues. Appeals courts consistently upheld the original death sentence, determining that mitigating circumstances did not offset the severity of the crimes of kidnapping, torture, and murder. A crucial turning point occurred in 2009, just months before the planned execution. A prisoner in the state prison testified that Wigley, who died in prison in 2000, had publicly boasted in prison that he, not Merrick, had directly committed the murder. The Florida Supreme Court formally considered this revealed information but ultimately rejected the witness testimony, citing a complete lack of credibility, authenticity, and supporting physical evidence. The court paved the way for the execution to proceed. The procedures for holding the condemned prisoner in custody were fully completed before the sentence was carried out. For his last meal, Merrick received a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich with mayonnaise on whole wheat bread, French fries and crispy fried onions, a portion of blueberries and strawberries topped with whipped cream, and a can of Dr. Pepper. After completing the administrative procedures, Merrick was taken to the execution chamber on the 19th of August, 2009. Given the opportunity to make a final statement, he refused all excuses and said, "Jesus brings peace. I entrust my soul into his hands." The lethal injection procedure was carried out immediately afterward, ending the administrative process. The execution of Martin Edward Grossman on the 16th of February 2010 finally concluded a serious case involving the murder of a Florida police officer. Grossman was convicted of first-degree murder following a fatal encounter during a routine patrol. The proceedings sparked debate within the criminal justice system about the intellectual capacity of defendants facing the death penalty and statutory protections for wildlife conservationists working in isolated areas. The main perpetrator of this case was Martin Edward Grossman, born in 1965, who committed the heinous crime at the age of 19. Case records indicate that at the time of the incident, Grossman was a fugitive, having escaped from a juvenile detention center and was in direct violation of his probation. Subsequent psychological and educational assessments determined that Grossman had an overall IQ of approximately 77, indicating low intellectual ability. His accomplice, Charles Brewer, initially engaged in confrontation but later chose to fully cooperate with state investigators. In exchange for logistical assistance and detailed testimony about the murder, Brewer avoided the death penalty and received a life sentence without parole. Meanwhile, the victim was Margaret Peggy Park, 26, a uniformed officer working for the Florida Freshwater Fish and Wildlife Commission, GFC. Officer Park was murdered while on a solo patrol in a remote wilderness area where she had intercepted suspects engaged in illegal hunting. From an analytical perspective, the Grossman case underscores the high operational risks faced by conservation officers working alone in isolated environments and highlights how a suspect's fugitive status can quickly transform a routine administrative inspection into a deadly confrontation. The events of the murder committed by Martin Edward Grossman and his accomplice Charles Brewer took place on the 13th of December, 1984, in a remote area of Pinellas County, Florida. Grossman, then 19 years old and, with an estimated IQ of 77, was accompanied by his accomplice, Charles Brewer. The two drove a cargo truck into a densely forested area teeming with wildlife, with the clear intention of practicing illegal shooting. To accomplish this, they used an illegally acquired handgun, specifically one obtained through theft. The illegal firing in the protected natural area created a distinctive sound, attracting the attention of local police officers on duty in the area. The victim, Margaret Peggy Park, 26 years old, was a wildlife conservation officer working for the Florida Fish and Freshwater Wildlife Commission. Officer Park was patrolling alone in the wilderness when she heard a series of gunshots. Following standard operating procedures, she drove her patrol car toward the source of the noise to investigate potential hunting and fishing violations. Upon arriving at the scene, Officer Park exited her vehicle, confronted Grossman and Brewer, and discovered the firearm was illegally possessed. Following procedure, she formally confiscated the stolen handgun and seized both men's driver's licenses for routine background checks and verification of their legal status. The situation escalated significantly when Officer Park turned her back on the suspects and began walking back to her parked patrol car. Her goal was to use the car's radio to transmit identification data to the central dispatch system for verification. Grossman, fully aware of his current legal status, realized that a computer query would immediately alert police to his numerous ongoing probation violations and his status as a fugitive from a juvenile detention facility. He realized that this discovery would lead to his immediate arrest and lengthy detention. In a state of psychological panic due to his limited cognitive abilities, Grossman made the administrative decision to use force to stop the transmission. He signaled to Brewer, indicating they needed to directly attack the lone officer. Following the instructions, Brewer acted immediately, using a heavy object to physically assault Officer Park. Despite suffering sudden and severe physical distress, Officer Park maintained her resolve and attempted to defend himself. She drew her issued service weapon and attempted to neutralize the threat by firing at the attackers. However, due to severe physical injuries from the flashlight blows and the ongoing physical struggle, the bullet missed its target. The final phase of the confrontation occurred immediately after the service weapon was fired. Grossman lunged forward and wrestled directly with the injured officer, successfully subduing her and taking the weapon from her hand. After gaining complete control of the weapon, Grossman gained control of the weapon and fired, resulting in the fatal injury of Officer Park. Subsequent analysis confirmed that this action led to the immediate and tragic loss of the officer's life. In this case, a routine, low-level administrative inspection escalated into a serious murder. The primary cause of the violence stemmed from the suspect's desire to evade the legal consequences of violating probation, combined with a limited ability to assess long-term outcomes. The choice to test a stolen firearm in a remote location created precisely the conditions that would attract the attention of law enforcement. The transition from a non-violent theft to the coordinated killing of a uniformed officer demonstrates how the threat of imprisonment can trigger extreme, immediate violence in unstable individuals. The case also highlights the high vulnerability of solitary conservation patrols, where long communication delays and remote locations diminish the ability for timely intervention and support. The investigation proceeded swiftly due to the strict communication protocols maintained by the law enforcement coordination centers. When Officer Park failed to make scheduled radio communications and completely failed to respond to signals from the central office, superiors immediately escalated the situation to a severe emergency. The communication silence triggered the deployment of multiple regional law enforcement units to her last known coordinates within the Pinellas County Wildlife Conservation Area. Upon arriving at the remote scene, search teams found Officer Park's patrol car parked with its emergency lights on. Next to the vehicle, officers discovered the fallen wildlife officer, who had tragically succumbed to a fatal injury sustained during the confrontation. Despite suffering a severe head injury in the attack, Officer Park managed to gather crucial evidence necessary to solve the case before her death. When field technicians processed her body, they discovered that her hands were clutching two specific items: the valid driver's licenses of Martin Edward Grossman and Charles Brewer. Police Officer Park had held onto these identification documents throughout the intense flashlight throwing and subsequent struggle to disarm her. This physical evidence served as an absolute, irrefutable link, eliminating the need for traditional forensic tracing or lengthy community investigations. With the correct names, descriptions, and registered addresses of the two suspects, a multi-district task force was mobilized within hours of the discovery, executing coordinated search warrants that led to the immediate arrest and detention of both Grossman and Brewer without further incident. During the subsequent interrogation and pretrial phases, the solidarity between the two defendants completely broke down. Aware of the seriousness of the premeditated murder charge involving a uniformed police officer, Charles Brewer chose to protect his legal interests by initiating plea negotiations with state prosecutors. Brewer agreed to fully cooperate with the murder investigation, providing detectives with a comprehensive, step-by-step witness account of the entire crime scene. Crucially, Brewer's formal testimony identified Grossman as the sole mastermind who initially ordered the attack and specifically took the service weapon from Officer Park, leading to the fatal outcome. In exchange for this crucial evidence, which secured a swift conviction for the state, the prosecution made an administrative plea, allowing Brewer to plead guilty to lesser charges and receive a life sentence without parole. Conversely, Grossman faced the full force of the state's criminal justice system, where a combination of Brewer's direct testimony and the driver's license obtained from the victim resulted in a first-degree murder conviction and a formal death sentence following an investigation and guilty plea. The motive for this heinous crime was determined to be directly related to an attempt to evade recustody and silence a police officer. Martin Edward Grossman was under immense legal pressure at the time of the confrontation. He was serving a probationary sentence for a previous major theft. Furthermore, Grossman had absconded from his juvenile boarding program and directly violated a court-ordered travel ban, prohibiting him from leaving the designated county. Despite his limited intelligence, Grossman accurately perceived that the moment Officer Margaret Peggy Park transmitted his identification data over the patrol radio, His probation violations and fugitive status would be exposed, leading to his immediate arrest and a lengthy return to state prison. To prevent this outcome, Grossman devised an immediate response plan to eliminate the officer, viewing her death as an administrative necessity to preserve his temporary freedom and evade the legal system. Ultimately, the 1985 trial of Martin Edward Grossman ended in death penalty after a strategic agreement between state prosecutors and his co-defendants. After Charles Brewer agreed to provide formal testimony against Grossman in exchange for a life sentence, the jury evaluated forensic data and witness testimony. The prosecution's focus was on the intentional killing of Officer Margaret Peggy Park while she was on duty. Based on statutory aggravating circumstances, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge sentenced him to death. During the subsequent appeals process, Grossman's legal team repeatedly filed requests for stays of execution. The defense relied on three main mitigating factors: Grossman's recorded low overall IQ of 77, his psychological distress during the roadside confrontation, and his clearly documented deep spiritual repentance throughout his decades of incarceration. These legal actions aimed to reduce the death sentence to life imprisonment without parole, arguing that cognitive impairment should be a reason for excluding the application of the death penalty. By the time the execution date approached in 2010, the case had become a major international political and religious controversy. Grossman's conversion to Judaism and his active spiritual practices during his imprisonment fueled a widespread international amnesty campaign. A vast coalition of global Jewish organizations, prominent rabbis, and state legislators mobilized in support of the prisoner, generating tens of thousands of letters and formal petitions addressed to the Florida governor. Outside the execution facility, groups of supporters gathered to protest and lobby for clemency. Despite this intense public pressure, the Florida governor refused the pardon request, stating that maintaining the absolute integrity of the law regarding the murder of a law enforcement officer required the execution of a court order. Prison procedures were followed until the scheduled execution on the 16th of February 2010. For his last meal, Grossman used his own money to purchase items directly from the prison cafeteria, choosing a chicken sandwich, a can of fruit juice, banana cream cookies, and peanut butter cookies. After finishing his meal, Grossman was led into the execution chamber. When given the opportunity to make a formal, final statement, he told the victim's representative, "I want to offer my deepest apologies to the family of Officer Peggy Park. I pray for your peace. I believe in God and ask for His forgiveness." The lethal injection procedure was carried out immediately after the announcement, and medical personnel declared him dead shortly afterward. We've reviewed 4 of Florida's most horrific execution cases, featuring the different last words of the condemned prisoners. Please share your comments below. I'll read them all. On the 21st of April, 2026, the state of Florida executed Chadwick Scott Willesee, 58, by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. The execution concluded a legal process spanning over 36 years, during which Willesee repeatedly appealed to avoid conviction. The case stemmed from a 1,990 burglary in Palm Bay, escalating into one of the state's most serious criminal cases. Watch this entire video for a detailed look at the case, the execution, Willesee's last words, and his final meal before death. Despite clear forensic evidence proving his guilt, why did it take 36 years for the case to finally reach a verdict? To understand what happened, we first need to know who Chadwick Scott Willesee was. Chadwick Scott Willesee was born on the 23rd of September 1967. In 1990, at the age of 22, he moved from another area to settle in Brevard County, Florida. During this period, Willesee faced severe socioeconomic difficulties, was completely unemployed, and lacked a stable source of income. This financial hardship was exacerbated by his heavy addiction to crack cocaine, a substance that impairs cognitive function and promotes impulsive behavior in users seeking their next dose. His daily life was completely dominated by the need to earn money to sustain his dependence on this substance, leading to theft becoming his primary means of earning money. On the other side of the case file was the victim, Marley Sather. Miss Sather was a middle-aged woman living in a quiet residential area of Palm Bay, Florida. In the community, she was known as a gentle, kind, and exemplary neighbor, always adhering to a disciplined daily routine. Within her family, Mrs. Sather played the role of the primary caregiver, having lost her husband to a serious illness. A devoted mother and grandmother, she provided a solid foundation for her large, stable, and deeply connected family. The safety and stability of her family contrasted sharply with the precarious living conditions of the suspect nearby. Willacy had direct access to this family's activities because he lived right next door. This geographical proximity allowed him to closely observe Mrs. Sather and her family members' daily routines and activities over a long period. His severe methamphetamine addiction, combined with complete unemployment, created a desperate need for cash, influencing his decision-making process. Willacy used detailed observations of Mrs. Sather's daily routine to identify security weaknesses in her home, precisely noting the hours when the house was unattended. This information about the family's schedule provided the precise operating conditions he needed to plan a targeted break-in, setting the stage for the subsequent confrontation. Based on detailed knowledge of the victim's family situation, Chadwick Scott Willacy planned a burglary. On the afternoon of the 5th of September, 1990, after observing the neighboring house and confirming that no one was home, Willacy broke into his neighbor's house. His sole objective was to find and steal valuable items that could be immediately sold to buy methamphetamine. The entire plan was based on the assumption that he could complete the theft undetected within a certain time frame. However, the situation quickly changed when the homeowner, Marley Sather, unexpectedly returned during her lunch break and caught Willacy rummaging through her belongings. The confrontation immediately escalated into serious physical violence. Willacy armed himself with a nearby household object and violently assaulted Mrs. Sather during the confrontation. The assault caused catastrophic injuries, leaving the victim incapacitated. Willacy then attempted another method to prevent the victim from alerting authorities. He used household items in another attempt to incapacitate the victim. Those actions failed to achieve his intended objective. He restrained the victim using materials found inside the house to incapacitate her. He then moved the victim into another room from the main attack area into an adjacent empty bedroom. To permanently eliminate the sole witness and erase physical evidence of the burglary, Willacy began the process of destruction. He deliberately set fire to the residence in an effort to destroy evidence and eliminate the only witness. Before leaving the burning house, Willacy collected the valuables he had initially targeted, including Sather's personal jewelry, electronics, and checkbook, ensuring he didn't leave empty-handed. After the fire, Willacy escaped the scene. He used the victim's own car, a new sedan parked in the yard, to transport himself and the stolen goods away from the area. He drove through the local streets of Palm Bay to avoid the fire department. Upon reaching what he considered a safe location, he abandoned his car and walked back to his nearby home, attempting to blend into the neighborhood and play the role of an innocent bystander while firefighters extinguished the blaze. The subsequent investigation by the Palm Bay Police Department and homicide detective George Santiago combined forensic science with unexpected outside information to track down the perpetrator. After firefighters extinguished the blaze, investigators sealed off the empty bedroom and found the victim's body. Forensic experts immediately found fingerprints likely belonging to Willacy on a household fan near the victim, a recording device, and a discarded gasoline can. Furthermore, multiple neighborhood witnesses reported during the initial investigation that they had seen a man who looked exactly like Willacy driving Sather's car just before smoke rose from the street. After abandoning the victim's car, Willacy focused on tithing and hiding the stolen goods within his own home. He carefully stashed the electronic items, the jewelry boxes, and the personal papers in various hidden locations throughout his living space, believing that the fire next door would consume all physical indicators connecting him to Sather's house. He then went about his evening, attempting to establish a normal routine and acting as though he had no involvement in the destruction occurring mere feet away from his window. The fire department arrived quickly at the scene, responding to emergency calls from other neighborhood residents who observed smoke rising from the Sather household. Firefighters forced entry into the structure and began localized suppression efforts to contain the blaze within the rear bedroom. As they brought the flames under control, they discovered the bound body of the victim on the floor. The discovery immediately altered the nature of the emergency response, transforming the active fire scene into a secure crime scene, subject to immediate criminal protocols. The scene underwent thorough physical documentation by forensic technicians, who documented fire patterns throughout the room on the floorboards and noted the position of the physical restraints on the victim: the clothing iron, the severed telephone wires, and the remaining duct tape fragments were collected as evidence. This physical evidence, combined with the detailed notes on structural damage, allowed investigators to establish the chronological sequence of events inside the home, proving that the burglary, assault, binding, and arson occurred in rapid succession on that afternoon. Following the discovery of the house fire, the Palm Bay Police Department immediately responded to the scene. The investigation, led by homicide detective George Santiago, quickly established a security cordon and sealed off the area to preserve potential evidence. Initial assessments of the structural damage indicated signs of fire inconsistent with a random electrical fault. Further examination of the room where the fire originated revealed the homeowner's body and clear evidence of a violent struggle, suggesting the incident was a murder staged to look like an accident. Forensic teams working at the scene uncovered crucial physical evidence linking the perpetrator to the crime. Investigators recovered potential fingerprints of Chadwick Scott Willacy from several items inside the house, including a household fan placed near the victim's feet, a tape recorder, and a can of gasoline used to spread the incendiary device. Additionally, several neighborhood witnesses reported seeing a man resembling Willacy driving the victim's car on the day of the murder. A breakthrough in the case occurred shortly afterward when Willacy's girlfriend contacted law enforcement after discovering a women's checkbook discarded in her family's trash can. Officers arriving at the scene identified the document as belonging to Marley Sather, immediately providing compelling evidence for his arrest. Willacy was apprehended shortly thereafter while attempting to conceal and dispose of the remaining stolen items. A subsequent search warrant at his home uncovered further property belonging to Sather, along with some blood-stained clothing matching the victim's blood type. Investigators concluded that the incident involved two distinct motives that developed as events unfolded. According to prosecutors, the unlawful entry was initially driven by financial gain, with the intention of taking property that could be quickly converted into cash to support Willacy's long-term drug addiction. However, the situation changed dramatically when the homeowner unexpectedly returned to the residence. Because Willacy lived nearby, investigators argued that he believed his identity could be immediately recognized and reported to law enforcement. Prosecutors therefore maintained that the incident escalated beyond theft as additional actions were taken to avoid identification, conceal evidence, and reduce the likelihood of arrest. This interpretation became a central element of the state's theory throughout the criminal proceedings. With a comprehensive array of forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the recovered stolen property, the prosecution established an irrefutable case against the defendant. Given the absolute clarity of the physical evidence and the severity of the crime, the public and legal observers anticipated a swift resolution to the proceedings. However, the case did not end quickly, instead entering a complex legal process that dragged on for more than 3 decades. This raises a fundamental question for legal analysts tracing the timeline of the U.S. justice system. What specific procedural mechanisms, statutory changes, and constitutional challenges allowed a case with such compelling forensic evidence to remain unresolved in the court system for over 36 years? In December 1991, the justice system delivered its first major verdict in the case between the state of Florida and Chadwick Scott Willacy. After careful consideration of physical evidence and witness testimony, the jury found the defendant guilty of multiple criminal offenses, specifically first-degree premeditated murder, robbery, and arson. Based on the severity of the murders, the court formally sentenced Willacy to death, establishing the initial legal order for execution. However, This initial death sentence was later overturned due to systemic changes in the state's legal framework. In the mid-1990s, appellate courts required structural changes regarding how juries assess aggravating and mitigating circumstances in death penalty judgments, which directly impacted existing rulings. Because the initial sentencing phase did not meet these updated constitutional requirements, the justice system overturned the original death sentence and scheduled a full retrial to review the case under the new guidelines. The retrial formally took place in November 1995. During these trials, state prosecutors presented detailed forensic data on the violent nature of the 1,990 crime. After reviewing the evidence, the new jury voted 9-3 in favor of the death penalty, leading to the presiding judge issuing a second death sentence for the defendant. This ruling returned Willacy to the state's death penalty system, beginning a period of more than 36 years of confinement in Florida Correctional Services. Throughout his decades of confinement in the death penalty area, Willacy was held in high-security, solitary confinement, isolated from other prisoners. His daily schedule was severely restricted, including limited cell allocation, supervised leisure time, and tight administrative supervision. Throughout this lengthy period of incarceration, Willacy refused to accept the finality of his sentence, instead continuously working with defense lawyers, specializing in appeals to challenge the verdict and systematically delay the execution. A prominent feature of his time in prison was the constant filing of legal petitions to ensure a full review of his case. Willacy's legal team filed numerous appeals, post-conviction pleas, and extradition requests, sending the case back and forth between the Florida Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court. His lawyers focused heavily on allegations of ineffective defense counsel in the initial 1991 trial, argued against the constitutionality of Florida's lethal injection procedure under the Eighth Amendment, and repeatedly sought a reduction of the sentence to life imprisonment without parole. These ongoing challenges made Willacy one of the longest-serving death row inmates in the state's history. The protracted legal battle required the victim's family to continuously monitor the court records for generations, preventing an administrative closure of the case for over 3 decades. This lengthy appeals process finally concluded in early 2026, when the U.S. Supreme Court officially rejected his final petition for a stay of execution. After exhausting all legal avenues, the final death sentence was signed, ending 36 years of procedural delays and setting a court-determined execution date. The final stage of the procedure took place on the 21st of April 2026 at the Florida State Prison in Stark at approximately 6:15 p.m. The local time, the state carried out the execution ordered by the court at the Florida State Prison following the established procedures of the Florida Department of Corrections. After being secured in a special bed and having an intravenous line established, the court authorized. Execution protocol was then carried out in accordance with Florida Department of Corrections procedures. Just minutes later, medical personnel checked his vital signs and officially declared Willacy dead in the presence of state officials and family members through the glass of the execution chamber. This process was conducted under official supervision and in the presence of authorized witnesses, including state representatives, legal officials, and members of the victim's family. Medical personnel monitored the entire process before officially certifying its completion as required by state regulations. Before the scheduled execution, prison staff carried out administrative procedures related to the final requests of the convicted inmate. This process included preparing the last meal. According to Florida State Prison regulations, inmates sentenced to death are permitted to request a specific last meal, provided the total cost does not exceed $40 and the ingredients are available in the local geographic area. Willacy's detailed list of specific food requests still adheres to standard security restrictions imposed by prison authorities, who typically manage these records based on the prison's security policy and the family's wishes. Before the sentence was carried out, prison officials followed standard administrative procedures by giving Willacy the opportunity to make a final public statement. Speaking before those permitted to witness the trial, he expressed regret to the Marlis Sather family and briefly reflected on the years he had spent in prison. Prison staff recorded this statement as part of the prison's official records, closing the final chapter in the case's public history. The completion of the court-approved sentence marked the official end of a case that had existed within the Florida justice system for nearly 4 decades. For the Marlis Sather family, it represented the end of an unusually long legal process spanning generations. After all, appeals had been considered and the formal proceedings concluded, the case was removed from the list of active cases and transferred to the state's permanent judicial archives. The investigation and prosecution remain a part of Florida's legal history as one of the state's longest-running execution cases. What are your thoughts on this case? Please leave a comment below. We will read the all. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe to my channel to receive notifications about the latest and most famous executions coming soon.